having a great start to the day. Happy Friday Eve. Hopefully your day has a little bit more sunshine than some of us here on the East Coast that are getting rain this morning. But my name is Meredith Garfalo, and I'm your moderator for the morning edition of our second day of Conversations for the Future with Foundation for the Future. I was moderator yesterday morning as well, but if you are just joining us, I am actually a broadcast meteorologist and a space and science correspondent here in the New York City area for News 12. I also am very active in the space community. I've really taken space storytelling and journalism to the next level, and I moderate panels at conferences such as the Space Symposium and Satellite Conference, and I'm extremely passionate about space. Got bitten by the space bug 5 years ago, and now I am all helping get our next generations excited as there's a place for everyone in space. And so we're glad you're here. Of course, if you think of any questions, don't forget to put them in the chat. We have some great speakers this morning I'm really excited to introduce you to and get those conversations going. But first, as I called him yesterday, our face for space, I would like to introduce you to Tim Chrisman. He is the Executive Director for Foundation for the Future, and we are going to get caught up on what's happening with the organization and also officially kick things off. So, Tim, I'm going to give you the floor right now.
Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to have a chance to spend some time giving an update on what the foundation's been doing, where we've been going. It's been a few months now, for a good while there. More or less every month, I was spending some time chatting with everybody about what's happened, what's changed, what's new. But over the this past 6 months or so, it's been a choice. Do I bump a speaker to give an update, or do we just space these out more? And the answer was always, let's do this more quarterly than losing one of the great speakers that, in my view, actually has something useful to say, because it's stuff I don't know about. But at the same time, giving the family an update on what we're doing is important, and so I'm excited to have a chance to do that here. So I was going to break it down and talk about what's been happening with our government affairs work, the policy work, our workforce development, and then give quick updates on where we're going with both those, as well as what's been going on with like new members and events. So I do have slides, and I could share those just to make things more interesting, since while some people say I have a face for space, it's always better to have pictures up here to distract from that. So with government affairs, this past, I guess it's been about 6 months now, or 6 months into the year, give or take. I'm not good at counting. We have seen that Congress has been really consumed by three things. The first is inflation. It seems like once a month, there's been some new statistic that's come out talking about how inflation's gotten worse in some way, shape, or form. Most of us already knew inflation was pretty bad, but Congress has now more or less ground to a halt in doing anything other than throwing ideas at the wall of how to fix inflation. I think the vast majority of us know they are not going to be the ones that fix it, but they need to be seen as doing something. And so that has really put a damper on a lot of talks around everything, ranging from who is being appointed to positions in the government that oversee space activities. It took months for the DoD's chief of space acquisitions to be confirmed. And even then, that was only one confirmation among better part of a half dozen that need to be voted on. And realistically, confirmations of administration positions are some of the simplest votes for Congress to be taking. So this crisis that Congress is wrestling with has derailed a lot of any talk of domestic activity or support around or for the space sector. On the flip side, though, once Ukraine started kicking off and Maxar sort of became front and center of what's happening today in Ukraine, there's been a huge surge in interest from just regular people and the media in what is it that the space sector is doing to help Ukraine. We saw Elon Musk take advantage of this by shipping a bunch of Starlink terminals to Ukraine. There's currently some controversy as to whether he donated those or the government paid for them. Doesn't necessarily matter. All press is good press in this case, because we do see that this satellite internet is helping the people of Ukraine. We're getting to see some of the real-time benefits of how Starlink is able to use some of its advanced software-defined radios and the like to get around jamming. And so that's been a great advertisement for how the space sector can really make a difference here on the ground. And so we're looking at this as we're starting to map out what's coming as a way to showcase the benefits of a commercial space sector that's strong, that has a wide range of competitors, how that can bolster the US's national security interests, and do that fairly cheaply. And so that's been a positive. The last piece that sort of kept Congress sort of wrapped around its own axle is the upcoming elections, whether it's congressional members going through primary races, districts being redrawn. For the most part, a lot of the Congress people know that their jobs are safe. However, there's still a sizable chunk of them that are more or less having to go compete for their job, and that distracts them from having to do their day job. So we're seeing more and more bills be introduced with the only intention being that it's a way for a congressperson to say they're doing something about a problem that matters back home, and not having the time or interest to push it further. We've more or less put a mark on the wall as Memorial Day being the last day for Congress to really have introduced anything that might be remotely serious before the election. And so we'll see. We've got about a week left there. Don't have high hopes, but it does mean that we now have 6 months of preparation before the next Congress. And so that gets into where we're going with our policy work. Because we've got this time and the ability to game out who's going to be sitting in what chairs in the new Congress, we've been working to ensure that we have a menu of policy options available to the incoming Congress that we can help try to score some quick wins. And so one of them is this capital gains tax holiday. It is very similar to the 0G0 tax proposal that was put forward a number of years back. Essentially said, if you make something in space, you don't pay taxes on it. It's meant to be an incentive for companies to be making things in space. This is a proposal that would create a capital gains tax holiday for investments in sectors deemed critical to national security. And so one of those that would be written into the bill is space, but it would also expand out to include other things that are politically hot right now, like semiconductors, and may go all the way through baby formula, since that's the latest thing to have the Defense Production Act activated for. And if you don't know what the Defense Production Act is, let me know. We'll talk about that separate. It's fascinating. So the capital gains tax holidays, one proposal we've been circulating, Space Corporation Act remains one that we're continuing to work on the Hill. We continue to find interested Congresspeople. And as I mentioned on the slide before, for one of those three reasons, most are telling us that they just don't have the time right now. To get back to this idea of laying the groundwork for what's coming, the California delegation to the House, so about 50 plus members, they have what they call an aerospace caucus. So it's a group of them that it's basically a badge that they can wear on their Boy Scout or Girl Scout uniform, saying that they support the aerospace sector. There's caucuses like this for everything. But what matters to us is that one of the leaders of this caucus, Representative Calvert, reached out to us and said, I want to hold a reception to thank aerospace companies in California for staying in California, for contributing to the economy. And so we're working with his staff to organize a reception on the sidelines of a conference here in DC in September, where these members from California can come out and thank these companies. So this is a huge opportunity to not only help a congressman and connect him to a number of space companies that maybe he's not already connected to, but also to ensure that other members of the California delegation understand, what it is we're working on, what these priorities are around space infrastructure, and how that can benefit them and their constituents. And so that this fall is going to be a great opportunity for us and our members to get that message in front of a huge block of Congress people. And is that combined with our efforts to assist Space PAC, who we heard from yesterday with Rob Gabbert, are two of the big ways that we're looking to prepare the ground with those Congress people who are going to be continuing on. Maybe they're Congress people who are going to be promoted to new, more powerful positions because old ones are retiring. We're trying to make sure we get in early, let them know we support them, offer help where we can, and generally doing what most people assume is done in Congress, trying to scratch their back so that here in the future, they will think favorably on us. On the workforce side, most of what we've done this year has been the design and fleshing out of our Good Jobs Challenge proposal. This is at the heart of our Workforce for the Future plan. It is, in essence, a program that creates train the trainer programs for community and technical colleges across the country, where experts in trade labor training, instructors from the Space Coast or Texas or California are brought into schools in underserved areas, in areas that are interested in transferring the skills of their workforce into the space sector and helping upskill those schools. Not necessarily the students, because that's, we're trying to make sure there's schools that are ready to train that next generation rather than trying to go direct to the student. We can have far greater impact. And as an outcropping of that, we've created this space ready certification for these schools. So these schools that are participating in our workforce for the future, as their instructors are trained by these space ready trainers, the school then gets a certification that they are ready to begin training the next generation of space workers. They're entered into our national database that's available for our members, that's searchable, to help them as these companies and communities are looking to expand. That way they understand, here are the communities that already have technical schools ready to begin the work of training labor for them, and they don't have to sort of wonder where to go, how are we going to set this up, who's going to do that work. Because if there's one thing we've consistently heard, it's that there's just not enough of these space workers for the sector. And finding schools willing to start standing up training programs is extremely hard, because in many cases, they just don't believe that they can do something for space because they don't have a science program or they're not engineers. And so we're trying to change that between the Workforce for the Future program and its space ready certification. So what we're doing next, we've got the program design, we've submitted the proposals to the federal government for a public-private partnership. The decision on that is due in July. In the meantime, we're assuming that partnership's going to be approved and starting the work to design what it would look like to create these little franchises. And so once you've got this space ready school, how do we make it so they can start creating other ones around them? So it's not us having to go and train every single technical college in their area. How can we enable them to create these training programs in a box that then they can export to the surrounding areas? And so that is something we're working on with a number of different communities where we hope to be able to use them as sort of guinea pigs and try this out. That's going to be supported by our industry survey of the job needs that are out there. One thing that we've heard from as high up as the White House all the way through new startups is we just don't know, what jobs are out there and what jobs are needed. And so we're trying to work with our members and partners to craft a representative survey of the sector to get a sense of what is it that's needed, where is it needed, and what's the projection. Because most companies do have a sense of what they need now and what they're going to need in 3 to 5 years. There's just nowhere that's collected in a centralized manner. And so we're working with a couple White House offices to craft that and make sure that it feeds into the work they're doing on the workforce development side. And the final piece there is the workforce job board. And so we've reached out to the leadership at most of the major online job boards with the intent of creating a space-centric job board. It's going to be a partnership with one of those main ones, whether it's Indeed, ZipRecruiter, or one of the others. It'll be a white labeled space-only job board. So that way, instead of having to go to every space company's website and check their careers page, or having to depend exclusively on a LinkedIn, which doesn't often get most of the trade labor positions, there'll be a centralized place. It looks and feels like the job boards for any other sector. And we can finally start to have that single point of reference for job seekers and job posters. So that's going to be exciting. All of this work has been enabled by our growing roster of corporate members. So These are just the latest few who have joined over the past couple months. We're now up to about 40, 45 members as of this week between our corporate and workforce members. And this includes, household names like Barclays Investment Bank, all the way through ones like Worldwide Risk Management, which most people have never heard of, but they're doing the job of connecting the space sector to insurance brokerages around the world to make sure that if a launch doesn't go right, if a satellite malfunctions on orbit, that there's an insurance policy that's available. And so it's really cool to be able to see the full range of companies that are coming on board, taking advantage of our reach and helping to grow the influence of the organization from within. So that has been really cool to see. And most of these groups, if you've been watching our events over the past couple months, you've seen people from them there speak. It is our intent to continue to bring in speakers from our members as much as possible. It's a key benefit that we offer to them, is giving them this platform to talk about what's new, what's coming, and help them wherever possible, because at the end of the day, we're all benefiting as they grow. I know I'm coming up on time, and so I just wanted to quickly walk through some of the events that are coming up this year that we're going to be participating in. So we're working with AIAA to co-brand some events as part of Ascend 22 in Las Vegas this November. Is that November or October? Anyway, this fall. I don't have to know dates this far out, but I know it's this fall. Space Cowboy Ball is another one we're working to co-brand with Earthlight Foundation, so that'll be exciting. We've been invited to participate in the Star Trek convention in August. We'll be holding our second Blue Marble Night in December, the celebration of that first Blue Marble photo that was taken. I already mentioned the Aerospace Caucus reception that's happening in September. We are looking both for that and the Space Cowboy Ball for corporate members or other companies that are interested in sponsoring or partnering for both of those. If you're interested, reach out. I'll get you more information about what it is we're looking for, what we're offering, and we can go from there. And then finally, you're here at a Conversations for the Future. It's going to be here every month. And so we look forward to seeing you back at next month's and the months to come. So with that, I will end it and see if there's any questions.
Yes, actually, we had a really good question that came in, and I think it's something that a lot of people are wondering. I know you talked about doing a lot of this workforce stuff here in the United States, but is this something that you're going to open internationally eventually, or is it something that there's already in the works to get more international partners and more of these workforce education for kids in these schools like we've already been doing here in the United States?
Yeah, it's definitely our intent to grow that internationally. I say we have a model that's similar to the Commercial Satellite Corporation from the 1960s, where it was formed in the US, but within about a year or two of its creation, it became a part of the international consortium known as Intelsat. And so started here, got the ball rolling, but immediately pivoted to looking out and seeing how it can work with international organizations. And so we're definitely looking at that. We're in talks with a number of groups in Europe. We have calls later this month with people that are tied into Space for Africa about expanding to both those continents. And by expanding, I don't necessarily mean we do it, because I think everything's done best when it's done locally. And so as much as possible, we want to provide the tools, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, where we're doing it, and help enable organizations locally to grow their own capacity.
Awesome. And if you are somebody that is asking about the events, when they are, April has been fantastic. Head into the chat and there are links there to the different events. So if it's something that speaks to you, you want to volunteer, you want to make a donation, you want to become members at the corporate level, so many great ways to do so. And of course, Tim, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you if they are interested in participating in any of these events?
You can reach out to me, Tim, at f4fspace.org. I'll drop it in the chat.
Awesome. Well, Tim, thank you so much. I know I'm excited. I need to get my cowboy boots polished off and start planning so I can come out to DC hopefully in the fall for that. But again, thank you so much, Tim, for those great updates. And of course, always go in the chat. Make sure you leave your questions. Let us know if you want more information on something, because next speaker, I know he is very excited to be here today, which I love the passion and I love the excitement. And so I'm very excited right now to give you a little bit of background on Patrick Cumba, like Cumbia. I should have asked first.
You got it.
I did? Yay. Okay, perfect. So Patrick is the president and principal director of an international consulting firm named Patrick Cumba, LLC. He has more than 3 decades of national security and law enforcement expertise. Patrick provides strategic and operational advice, as well as support services related to various cleared critical infrastructure protection and national security programs. Patrick maintains subject matter expertise with the identification and development of advanced technologies that have globally worked into the national security applications and also integrating these technologies into mission critical programs. Patrick also frequently matches emerging security requirements with validated emerging technologies. Patrick, thank you so much for joining Conversations for the Future this month, and we are very excited to hear what you have prepared for us today.
Well, thank you, Meredith. I appreciate the introduction. And Tim's presentation prior to this was, I think, a great segue right into what we're going to talk about. So I apologize in advance to everybody. I speak fast, so we've got a lot of ground to cover because there's going to be 2 more presenters after me. So I'm going to be kind of bring up a screen here and try to be as succinct and quick as possible, so I don't steal everybody else's thunder after me. So like Meredith mentioned, I've got a handful of different business channels, 30 years law enforcement and security, different expertise. All of that is centric around continuity of operations. So anybody who does anything with security has to have some exposure with all things related to satellite, right? Because, at the end of the day, all else fails. A lot of times the last hope that we have is for continuity of operations is satellite. So over the decades, in all kinds of different venues, I've leaned on satellite and I'm a current practitioner. So it's kind of fun because you get to see, as we get into this, some real world applications where it's actually being deployed and used. All kinds of neat stuff about my past performance. My firm's sole sourced under the FAR and the DFAR. I helped Boeing commercialize the MIL KA and KU spectrum when it was previously only dedicated for the military. So lots of exposure again. Another interesting success that my firm has had is the team that assembled an ongoing satellite IoT for hospitals in Puerto Rico is still up and going. They got wiped out 4 or 5 years ago. And the robust satellite IoT that we put together on a budget is still up and running. And when you talk to them down there, they'll tell you that satellite IoT in a medical environment for the hospitals is still more dependable than their local infrastructure. So I think that's kind of a telling sign for everybody on this call is it's all about, the end of the day, the satellites, whether you love them or hate them, whatever, you need them, right? All right, so here we go. So I've been an advisor for a company called Technium for over a year now, and kind of help validate and do test and evaluations internationally with their technology. We're going to kind of speak to that very quickly. So what I typically do is do a matchmaker a lot of times. So I'm really driven by requirements, right? So by customer requirements, mission driven, that's the number one thing. So here's an immediate requirement that I identified, and you see there's a fire chief or a EMS chief here, Peter Bochansky, and he'll be speaking just after me regarding this. So they've got a hospital outside of Philadelphia, large EMS presence as well, 60 plus EMTs, and they support 5 local firehouses. So this is what they call an urban area security initiative, UASI region in Philadelphia. Lots of people, lots of bad things can happen. And then this would be the medical response if the bad things happen, right? So they're under the umbrella of a hospital called Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital, which is actually part of the Trinity Mid-Atlantic Healthcare Network. So you see now that they have a hospital there, 180 bed acute care facility, large area, and they're actually in Delaware County. Again, I already spoke to where they're at, right? They're in the UASI region. So the issue that they have, and this is why we're kind of talking about this today, is there's gaps in their response, resiliency, and recovery, right? At the end of the day, there's certain times when they can't maintain what is known as a medical IoT, right? So an Internet of Things. So what will happen is say, and Pete will give you a lot more color with this, but essentially there's certain areas where there's gaps. If you can't connect to the internet, you can't triage the patients, you can't communicate, and you guys are smart, all the different things that can happen if they can't do that. So as an advisor and an evaluator for Technium, one of the places that we did is we essentially took it up to Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital with the EMS and the medical personnel and just did a read ahead, did a presentation of the Technium technology, right? So what the device did is we showed up and it essentially was able to create an IoT where there may not be one. So in other words, if they're in a valley someplace, and even if the cellular signal is working, if they're down in the valley or there's some kind of denial of service and the communications are failing, pick your scenario, whatever it is, this device demonstrated to them, at least in the parking lot, 1,000-foot radius where they could bring in 200 plus disparate devices at the same time. In addition to that, it can support, they utilize a PTT capability where it's essentially driven on internet or cellular, and it can support that as well. And when we talk about what Technium does, I'll let Pete or Tim get into the weeds on that as far as how it performs, how the technology operates, what it looks like, et cetera. This is essentially speaking to the requirement and the solution. So this is kind of what I'm giving you guys, a 50,000-foot view as quickly as I can. Excuse me, the second requirement that I have presently is I'm supporting a NGO. It's a US NGO with humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. And I know Tim had just mentioned that as one of the focuses of our government right now, all things Ukraine, right? So at the end of the day, I'm supporting with security, continuity of operations, et cetera, for a humanitarian mission in Ukraine. As you guys can imagine, I have a satellite IoT that everyone's kind of impressed with because it's simple, nimble, robust, and it's essentially covert, and it's working well. So the NGO has been approached by the telcos and the ISPs in the country of Ukraine about, hey, what other solutions can you build out? So a secondary solution that I will speak to here with Technium, and Technium could absolutely be part of this, is they can essentially take the optimal cellular signal, wherever it is, and then project that to a further location. Because what's happening in Ukraine is the adversaries are destroying some of the infrastructure, not necessarily all of it. So in other words, say you have 5 cell towers. Well, the adversaries may have taken out 3 of them, so you've got 2 left. So what Technium can do is either take the optimal cellular signal and then project that to extend the last mile range of the cellular signal with cellular, or of course they can do it with satellite. So as you guys, I'm sure, are kind of starting to draw the connections, this is a great solution for humanitarian aid, a FEMA disaster response scenario, or any kind of a continuity of operations scenario. So there's going to be a pilot in Ukraine. So my firm's doing it with the NGO, and we'll see how that goes. But I think it's going to be pretty interesting and pretty compelling. So the game changer is the cell on light truck. They call them Colts, or they'll call them cows, where it's essentially a big cell tower on a truck. So if you drive that to the side of the mountain, because that's what everyone will say, well, why don't you just drive a Colt out there? Well, the adversary will see a big truck with a big tower on it and then destroy it. This device, the Technium device, the Rux, is way more affordable. It's a man-portable suitcase. You can walk up. If it gets destroyed, we'll send another one over there because it's way less expensive. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I'm trying to go as fast as I can because I'm going to tee up Chief Bochansky next. And Pete, I'll bring up the pictures from our visit as you kind of talk through your bio, if you like. I think you're muted, Pete.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me okay?
There we go. Yep, we got you, Pete.
Excellent. I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to talk to everybody today. Like Patrick said, I met him back in around about October. And I think between then and now, I'm actually able to keep up with conversations with him. I'm learning to adjust to the speed. But when we met back in October and met with Tim from Technium, we had looked at some of the gaps that we had identified in our responses. Not only in the hospital, we've had it's an older facility with the older infrastructure problems, and had a couple occasions, one recent to that visit, where they lost internet communications for the emergency room, between the emergency room and the lab, which then leads to them being unable to do testing, and a huge gap in our ability to care for the patients that come into the hospital. On top of that, our emergency response system, currently, our county radio system, I believe, is in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 years old. We've had a lot of problems recently with what they call atmospheric ducting. And the county's put a few things in place as far as backup radio channels, and our fail-safe to the county radio system is the internet-based push-to-talk, which we found in a couple of places, depending on the cell signal, isn't as reliable as we thought it was on the cell end of things. So when they brought the Rux up to the hospital, we were able to set that up and connect via our cell phones with that backup system, and having that redundancy there will close that gap as far as communications. And we've also had several mass casualty incidents in the area, two specifically in our first do local, that we already had some connectivity issues. And I think the technology that's there, and I'm glad that he was able to kind of open our eyes to what's available out there, will help close a lot of those gaps. And I was going to say, if you'll indulge me for a minute, it is EMS week, so I wanted to bring that up. And the theme for this year is rising to the challenge, and a lot of that, I think this technology helps that as well. We've seen an increased burden on not only the EMS system for the call volume, and for the hospitals. In addition to the patient volume coming in, we have a couple of local facilities that have been closing in our sister county in Chester County, and now it's starting to happen with the hospital that's a mile up the road. And so I think we had talked, Patrick and I, back in the fall, about the other opportunities with the IoT and the satellite technology, to be able to set up a local network, to be able to partner with the long-term care facilities in the region, the police departments in the region, and then the other response agencies, to be able to set up maybe telehealth. So that with these long-term care facilities, instead of overburdening the hospitals, that we could have a closed network, that we could do telehealth visits. We could, set up a network with the police departments where we could medically clear people for incarceration, rather than the increased burden in the ER. And then also we identified with our community paramedic program that we're growing, those opportunities for telehealth, because our specific to our area is on the suburbs of Philadelphia, or on the border of Philadelphia in the suburbs, where we generally interact with a middle income to lower middle income and low income population, where our job really, we've identified, is to care for people that, you know, either may not know how or just may not be able to care for themselves. And I think that the IoT opportunities that are out there with this system will do wonder to help us increase our capabilities, like I said, not only in the response, but in the community wellness and prevention avenues as well.
Nice. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, sir.
Tim, are you ready? And I'll go ahead and bring up your slide deck next.
Yep, I'm ready, Pat.
Cool. You want to do a quick intro, just kind of who you are, where you're from, as I get the screen closed out here?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome. I appreciate everybody. I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you. My name's Tim Stranahan. I'm currently the COO for a company called Technium. We're based out of Kansas. I actually live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm former law enforcement. I was with New Jersey State Police, joined the FBI in 1996 and finished 23 years of service for the federal government and FBI. I finished as the assistant special agent in charge for North Carolina. I took care of all the national security matters. And I actually worked with Patrick back in the day when I first joined the FBI. He and I worked together in one of the worst neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., chasing around bad guys. But I left the FBI, retired from the FBI, and was recruited to this position as COO for Technium. And I was asked to see if I could take this device that they had developed for remote communications, and I asked to see if I could take this communication device and see applications throughout North Carolina and throughout the rest of the United States in rural areas to see if we couldn't help mainly the students get online. But very quickly, we saw that there was a need in other avenues and other business verticals that I'll touch on. But essentially, I'm going to talk to you about the remote universal communication system. On your screen, you can see it's a last mile solution. It's a micro IoT solution. It's made to be portable. It weighs about 50 pounds. It's affordable. It costs, one hundredth of what fiber would cost. It's one button push. There are only two pieces to this device, so there's no digging or trenching. So it's pretty whiz-bang technology, especially for rural areas that are looking for an affordable and timely solution for internet. Pat, if you can go to the next slide there. So as I mentioned, there's only two pieces to this system. The portable communications link, that's the suitcase thing that looks like on the side, that's about 50 pounds. And the distribution module, which you could call it an antenna, but it really distributes the signal that we receive, and it has a radius of 1,000 feet. And I'll get into a little bit more about what separates us from everybody else. The next slide, Pat. Oh, I think you went one too far. All right, so how it works. So the RUX itself can connect to satellite, cellular, or fiber. So, and we can actually connect to two of them. So if you're in an area like in many of the rural parts of West Virginia, North Carolina, if you have, let's say, a sudden link and you have a cellular signal from Verizon, we can take both of those and we can ingest them into the portable communications link. That then sends a signal out to our distribution module, which then emits the signal further. So 1,000 feet in each direction. So we are not an ISP. So we're not Verizon or Comcast. We don't magically create internet. But what we do is we find where internet exists around you and we bring it to you. So that may be like in areas of West Virginia, it may just be satellite. So we can provide and set up that IoT solution in the middle of nowhere, as long as we have a look at the sky. In North Carolina, we may have access to the sky and we may have access to a good cellular signal. So we'll combine the two of those to give you an enhanced signal. We always try and start out with the lowest. So if we can get you wire, we will, because it's more affordable. And we have fail safe. So it falls over into onto the wireless, and then it'll fall over onto satellite. So that way you're never without any communications. There's 250 ports on our distribution module, so we can put 250 clients on each one of those. So it creates a mesh network around where we put it. It immediately recognizes the next antennas, the next distribution modules, and reconciles with it. As I mentioned, it has a 1,000 feet radius, and we can load balance. We can do that remotely. So let's say you're in an area where, and this is important for hospitals, especially because they don't want to spend the money on the satellites. We can dial it one way or the other. So we can have you 80% on cellular and 20% on satellite. And then if there's a critical incident, we can dial that the other way so that you can stay up and running. And so this is ideal for rural areas. If you can get fiber, you really should. That's kind of the gold standard. But in many of the areas where we're working in the remote areas, there's just not fiber available. This is a solution that can be in the trunk of your car. You pull it out, you stand it up in about 5 minutes. It's connected to the network. You run through your critical incident, and then when you're done, you put it in the trunk and you move to the next location. So for our emergency response vehicles, our command post, our jocks, IOCs, this is a must-have. We're getting ready to install this on an island off of North Carolina. It's going to allow them to have not only primary communications, but backup communications for when a hurricane comes through and knocks them down. 5 minutes later, they'll be online either through wire, cellular, or satellite. And we're actually doing that in several different locations. So it's a pretty whiz bang in terms of that. It is BYOD available. So for in the hospitals, any device that's actually connected to the network, it's IP based, it will connect to the RUCs. And it's affordable and scalable. So that's some of the key points. Pat, if you want to go to the next one, please. And so I mentioned there's only two pieces to it, 250 users, and it really depends on the backhaul. So a lot of people will ask us, well, what kind of speed can I get? We don't magically create internet. Like I said, we don't guarantee you're going to get 100 by 20. But what we do is we place the RUCs in a position where you can get the best signal, and then we move that signal from point A to point B. So if you're down in the holler and you don't have, and that's where you're going to set up your command post, and you don't have access to communications, we could place the RUCs, we could place the PCL at the top of the hill, grab the cellular signal, and we can move it through our distribution modules down into the holler and then distribute that to 250 of the users. The access points, the distribution modules, these are one of a kind. We manufacture everything in Kansas. We own both the PCL and the distribution module. We can distribute our signal 1,000 feet in each direction. And importantly, we can do that same thing with satellite. So many of the manufacturers, you'll read that their satellite system only extends about 50 feet. We have tested this. Pat talks about his testing and evaluations that he's done. We've actually taken a BGAN satellite. We've connected it to our system. The BGAN really can only go about 50 feet, 75 feet. But with our system, we were able to walk out 1,000 feet and still have connection with the RUC system. We can remotely manage this as well. So we don't have to be on site to help you out. We can take care of that from Kansas. All right, Pat, if you want to go to the last one, please. So yeah, we talked about healthcare. We focused on education when we first started because the need was so great with our students. That's still great. So rural broadband is important for us. That's one of our top verticals. Telehealth, healthcare, the dynamic is certainly changed. The COVID has changed things for everybody. Senior citizens are no longer going into the office. They're wanting to have access to healthcare from distances, and we can certainly help out there, and we can help out the first responders by having having them the ability to triage patients long before they actually transport. First responders, I talked about FEMA, emergency response for any kind of crisis incident. It's applicable there. Government and defense, certainly there are government and defense applications there. Not our primary focus, but certainly in support of. Austere environments, this was purposely, this is ideal for the most remote areas. So you hear people talk about they are struggling with communications in the middle of nowhere. This device will set up communications for you. So whether it's in a heavily treed canopy area like West Virginia, or you're out, our CEO is out in Denver, up in the mountains, or out in the valleys. It's something that wherever you are, it can stand up an IoT in a matter of 5 minutes. Right now, we're working heavily with our telecom providers. We're not an ISP, but there's a lot of federal money that's cascading down to the local and state for expanding internet. We can connect to your network and extend your network further. And that's a very important point. So we're agnostic on the backhaul. We don't really care who it belongs to, if it's AT&T or Verizon. We can connect to that network and extend it further. We've had conversations with FirstNet about being able to extend their network to first responders in areas where they're actually dark. So for those gaps, please look at this as one of those fillers. I think that's all I have. My information's there. If you need additional information or you'd like to have a presentation or a demo, please reach out to me. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to present. Pat, back to you.
Thanks, Tim. Meredith, do you want to kind of toss out some of those questions and we can?
Yes. I mean, I love when the questions come in because people are really excited about what you're talking about and they're joining in on the conversation. So thank you for helping keep on time, Patrick. I know you guys have so much great information, but I do want to get to a few of those questions before we have our next guest. So first question that came in was about using drones to help boost a signal from a satellite as well. Is that something that's a possibility or something you're working on?
So that's the art of the possible question. So there's other kind of capabilities. So the short answer is yes. I don't think, Tim, if you want to chime in, I don't think you guys are really boosting the signal, but I think the opposite direction is they can support UASs, I think short range. And I think that's probably the canned response, right, Tim?
Yeah, we actually are partnered in Kansas with a company that has a drone network. So maybe something, as you said, maybe that's something we need to look at.
Yeah.
Awesome. And another question, Darnell is the questionnaire of the day so far today. And he was wondering about any plans of expanding telehealth internationally, especially in South America and African regions.
So I was trying to go fast. My office is co-located with my second office is co-located with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in El Salvador. So we're looking heavily at the Northern Triangle, along with some U.S. government efforts around there, and it's all around humanitarian. It's different kind of humanitarian efforts. Tim, you guys, anything going on in South America or Africa right now?
We just. No, nothing currently there. Well, we'll mention in terms of the hospitals, like I just briefed the West Virginia CEOs for the critical access hospitals, and that's important. These hospitals are starving for equipment. They have some of the greatest challenges. There's about 1,500 of them throughout the United States. So we're working with the most desperate folks to get this technology in there. So we're looking here in the United States first, but certainly we're going to look internationally.
Great. Thank you for that. And don't forget, everybody, if you have questions, put them in the chat, or if you are watching from our LinkedIn stream, make sure to comment and April will get those questions over to me so we can get those answered. I have a question, actually, being a meteorologist in the broadcast media. What are your plans to work with first responders, emergency managers when it comes to, for example, say hurricane season, and using your technology to help us give better preparedness to our viewers, both at the local, regional, and the national level?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no, great question.
Yeah.
We actually brought on board Mike Sprayberry. Mike was the Director of Emergency Management for the state of North Carolina, and he also was the president for the Emergency Management Coordinators for the nation. We are here within the next 30 days. You will see us reaching out to every state, especially along the East Coast as we get into hurricane season. A lot of the rural communities just don't have backup communications. They don't have a way of notifying people, hey, there's something coming. And then after the incident occurs, many of these communities don't have a critical incident plan in place where they can get their folks to check in on loved ones, start filing claims. And it doesn't have to be hurricanes. This can be tornadoes. Last year, we volunteered this system down to Louisiana when the hurricane came through. We were going to go down and stand up an IoT for a hospital there. Fortunately, they didn't need us, but I think you're going to see us more and more in the news as we lean forward, as we mature as a company, and we'll certainly look for those opportunities.
Well, great. You already have a connection here to the local media and some national connections. So we better connect after this so I can help you guys with that.
Absolutely.
I have a question that came in from LinkedIn. Kevin Russell would like to know, I see the Sierra Wireless RV50 cellular modem lower left in your rack. Correct. Having worked on thousands of these, what is your industrial SIM strategy on the cellular path?
That's a great engineering question. I'm sitting with our engineers currently in Kansas. I'll make that a question to ask them, but we do use the Sierra Wireless RV. We actually just got Department of Commerce approval to do some things. So I think that's going to be part of our growth strategy. But I'll make it an engineering question. I'll circle back to your user if you can shoot me his information.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This is concluding this portion of our conversation. I know somebody was also asking for more information on RUX. So if you guys want to go in the chat, maybe put the best way to email, phone numbers to connect with you guys, or find you on LinkedIn or social media. That'd be really helpful for all of our guests. So thank you so much. What a fantastic group, great conversation. And especially as we were even talking about going into hurricane season, going into a lot of these reports that are coming out that are showing that due to changes in the climate, we are seeing more intense storms and more frequent storms. And so technology like this, combining space with what we're doing here on Earth, will definitely help save more lives, protect more property. And for all of us, whether it's emergency management, whether it's the media, whether it's the general public, you guys are going to be making a great difference there. So thank you so much. All right, next one, as we are rolling along, because we have such a stellar lineup this morning, I am so excited to introduce you next to Troy Morris. So Troy is actually the Director of Operations for KMI. That is a Michigan-based orbital debris research and solution development company that is pursuing, this is good, active debris removal. And Troy leads the compliance, communication, and organization of the business. His education includes a bachelor's degree in psychology and behavioral analysis with a focus in human services from Northern Michigan University. And his experience also includes leadership and service with numerous academic and volunteer organizations, particularly with the volunteer medical nonprofit National Ski Patrol. And from ski slopes to space debris, Troy is working on helping save the world. That sounds like a superhero description. That's kind of cool, Troy. Welcome, welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. And you delivered the line better than we have envisioned it. So we'll have to, definitely get your vocal grab for that later. But
yes, I'll charge later.
No, it's wonderful to be here. Wonderful group, and always excited to be involved with such forward thoughts as this, especially after we're looking at something as dynamic of storms and our changing planet. Is humans have to be mindful of really where we're going and what we've done, and that's kind of what KMI is all about. So if my screen share works with me here, I will bring us in for the beginning of my little spiel. All right. And can I get a copy from anyone that you're seeing my screen?
Looks good.
Thank you. So like has been said, we are Call Morris Inc. I'm one of the co-founders. My other co-founders are in charge of engineering and technology. We're going to talk a little bit more about the hardware technology side in a few moments, but first is make sure everyone's up to speed of how big of a problem this is. Whether you look at the mass, the volume, or just the dollars, orbital debris is a huge issue. It's impacting hundreds of billions of dollars currently, and it can impact the trillions of dollars by 2040. Along the bottom, we're also seeing that trackable object list. That blue spike isn't a good one, and it's only increasing. This exponential growth is even more daunting when you remember that fact that debris is moving at 17,000 miles per hour, and it doesn't care what you hit. Now, it's a problem for us here on Earth because the average American is relying on space 30 times before they finish breakfast to keep up with friends, check email, use it to navigate around the world. So as space debris eliminates these critical services, it leaves millions disconnected. Our solution is a debris removal spacecraft. So as a quick little shot of it is the technology moving towards a target debris right there. That is a rocket body about 4 meters in length, 0.5 meter in diameter. And it's an actual debris object up over our heads right now. I can give you the TLE and the NORAD ID if we want to get that close on it. But it's really looking at how do we approach an object that was never prepared for capture, never had a docking port, never had fiduciaries, LED markers, anything. It was just a ride to get to space. And now it's threatening everything else we plan to put up there. So at KMI, we're working on a 3-step mission: characterize, capture, and control, so that we can make it, don't take it, and really take this former debris, these liabilities, and turn them into assets that we can build future pieces of our world with. It's gotten some great signaling from Space Force, some more exciting announcements to come in the coming weeks, but from Lieutenant General Chance, I can't tell you enough how important it is to rapidly characterize debris. And that's what we do with our software, kind of in step 1 there at the top of the screen. Then there's a use case for industry to go after that as a service-based opportunity for Major General Deanna Burt. Kind of what would happen in step 4 that isn't pictured here. But to give you guys the actual picture, I'm actually going to jump ahead and show a little bit more of the actual full ConOps as it falls, and then we'll do some available tech demos. So really the whole mission here is identifying targets. There's a number of great partners, both civilian and on the military side, that are working towards this. We're seeing government partners around the world that are developing their own space fence or versions thereof. So once we've worked with a partner, identified the target we're going after, Laylabs is launchable on almost any rideshare combination. We've been approached from everything from, the famous SpaceX to other rocket companies to balloons to hypersonics. And we've really looked at, sure, we're not rocket scientists, we're working on the other stuff. So once we get to orbit on whatever ride it ends up being, we align and confirm that the target is safe to capture. If it's not something unpredictable, we've got a solution for there of some station keeping and collect data, because there's so much humanity doesn't know about debris. Step 5 would be that little snippet of the video you saw where we go and capture debris. And I'll show you a behind the scenes float test that we have for that as well. 6 would be reducing the rotation of the target. Once you've captured on, it's one of the few benefits you get in space is that some of the forces we'd fight here on Earth just are absent. So we're really able to ride along and reduce the rotational energy of that target and then begin moving it. Whether it's to deorbit in the South Pacific graveyard that ISS might eventually end up in, if it's to move it to a new International Space Station, somewhere to do some processing, or are we just moving it to a graveyard orbit, someplace that future technology and future missions can go and use those components to build ISS-3, the next commercial LEO destinations. Just so much of the future is unfolding before us. Our technology also has that ability to release or hand over the target. It is not a one-shot use technology. We're not worrying about nets tingling or spears harpooning and you have to reload your shot. That adjustable claw, what we call reach, really gives us that availability and flexibility. So I'm going to go back a shot here and see if we can show reach in motion. So this is from our float test lab. It's just one gravity, but we've got 3 degrees of freedom here on the float bearing table. And you're able to see those arms, even though there's just 2 of them, unfurl around a target. But that last little toe there, that last segment, doesn't actually connect around the object. And so reach is able to perform better than most human mechanisms, is that I have to fully wrap my fingers around an object to hold it and move it and manipulate. With reach, using some of the technologies that are on those little white pads you see unfurling there, it's able to adhere non-destructively along the surfaces. Now, this is simulated solar panel, not exactly the grippiest of surfaces that we have up in space. Mylar, carbon fiber, a lot of aluminum is more likely what we'll see on actual rocket bodies, but solar panels are a huge target. So it's something we've done a lot of our early testing for. How can you secure and not just shear and rip off and create new debris itself, an object that was never intended for it? So know that there's quite a healthy amount of time here that was given for my spiel, my ability to speak to the audience here, but I'm a bigger fan for for communication rather than just one-way discussion. So as long as we still have that share, I'd like to, at this point, open it up a little bit early for questions and conversations rather than just marching through the entire pitch and other prepared pieces that I have there. So Meredith, if you want to direct us through that, and is my screen still sharing?
Yes, it is. It
Wonderful.
is. Wonderful. Wow, this is definitely interesting. And I am sure the questions are going to come in. They already have come in. That just goes to show everyone's intrigued. I mean, I'm intrigued because of the whole communications part of this. And we were just talking about how, especially during critical events, such as, say, like a tropical system or a tornado outbreak, and we're trying to get information out, especially to these more remote areas. How quickly, say there was an event that was happening, is there a way you could speed up the removal, or is it a certain process where you have to plan a certain amount of time before you can get that out of place safely, of course?
Mm-hmm. So I kind of take that, because we've gotten that question from those who wear bars on their shoulders to people concerned like yourself, is how quickly could you operate? And it's a question of what day is it? If it's today, the spacecraft still has to be launched. That adds some time of how quick can you launch a rocket, and others are working on that problem. But let's assume we're in the future. 5-10 years from now, we have multiple of these craft in orbit. It's under a week that we can easily move, maneuver, capture, and control an object that might threaten a NOAA satellite or might threaten the communication used to reach first responders on the ground, because Laura has looked at the information that's coming in, and we've had a determination there's a conjunction and it's too close to be sure if it's going to hit or not. We're happy to step in. And with those CARA projections being about a week out, us being less than a week, just as happenstance, but also extremely beneficial. Now, if there was also a situation that we had something more dire, in 3 days we know X object is going to hit Y object, there is an ability to move. It's just extremely inefficient. So that's the risk-benefit analysis of human lives, extremely worth it. We can burn the whole tank. Let's get there. Let's stop it. Let's do the right thing. But in normal missions, we'd be looking about once a week to actually do the capture once we're up in orbit there.
That's awesome. That's fantastic to hear. And another question that just came in from Adrian actually is, how big is your spacecraft? Is it 3U, 12U, ESPA? Maybe for people at home that are like, whoa, what can we use? Is it like a bus? Is it like a car? What would you say how big this is?
Yep. No, that's a great question. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit in the convenient use sizes, but it would fit in a duffel bag. So just giving a general frame of reference for those at home, duffel bag. Now, I'm not exactly going to bring it as carry-on with TSA for me, but it's quite easy to get where we need to. And it is designed for ESPA rings so that we can be agnostic to our launch vehicles. That was something really early in the design process. We don't want to try and just buy the top of a rocket. We need to be able to ride with others, whether it's launching a dozen of these Laylapse crafts at one, or just pacing pieces on a share ride. For its actual scale, on the reach middle section here, you see the tentacle and the electrostatic and the adhesion. Underneath that is a picture of available targets. So as we've done some of our early designs here, is Reach would be able to successfully capture anything as small as a basketball, and if we designed it up to the length of a box truck. So not grabbing it like a soda can or a sandwich, but the length from bumper to bumper, we'd be able to grab those size targets. So it really is fantastic how much those extendable arms can extend, for lack of a better word. But the spacecraft itself is about the size of an ESPA ring or duffel bag for those playing along at home.
Awesome. Another question that came in, this is actually an interesting one because we think of things happening in space, taking over. Darnell wants to know, how do you prevent these satellites from being used as anti-satellite by foreign governments if somebody could buy or hack into this to take down something that's not space junk?
Yeah. So one of the first parts of that is communication, of stating out early through contracts, whether it's with commercial partners or governments, of KMI is going after this specific NORAD ID. This is probably our planned path, so that if anything happened from an outside observer, whether they're sitting in Russia, China, the EU, anyone can look from an outside and you have transparency. So that's the first big step, is communication across the entire field so that everyone knows what object we're going after, even if the path seems, oh, it could be getting close to our thing, it's within the nominal trajectory. Second is cybersecurity is from some of the initial steps for any huge OSS mission that you're working on these days, is ensuring exactly that you don't get close to your target, close to the final few meters, and you've lost control. That's a terrible part for anyone. And we work with some of our communication partners who specialize just in that, from the ground to satellite communications, because just like we're not rocket scientists, I couldn't tell you the first 3 steps of what is essential for that. And that's why we work with our US and DoD cleared partners for that communication step. Third is the technology itself is IP protected, as well as we have trade secrets. So you could go and steal a patent. There's no standing military that'll generally stop that if you're in other countries, but there's also some secret sauce, as it's often said, that allows this technology to close those final few meters that without you are holding half of the solution. So we keep that as both a trade secret for business success as well as for national security success in that element. And the additional part of it is we plan to operate these craft. It's not something that we're going to have them sitting on shelves that you can go pick up a few at Walmart and launch them off into space. So on those parts, as well as, again, that week timeline. A week seems short when you're dealing with the rocket body's been up there for a few decades, but it's also a long time if a nefarious actor were to take control, throw an astronaut, he's just joyriding it right up there and we can't stop him. There is some time buffers built in. So it's about finding those sweet spots. How can we be the most transparent without being visible and repeatable by other bad actors?
Nice. I like the way you put that. That's very interesting. So we talk about moving the satellite and putting something into orbit, for example, in a graveyard orbit. Is there ever a goal to at some point be able to, and maybe I'm thinking, because I remember playing like all those games on Atari and stuff where you can like shoot at stuff. Is there going to be some time down the road you could, if you needed to, detonate something, or is that unsafe? I'm not very familiar with that. I'm sure a lot of people at home aren't either. Or is it more safe to just move it into a different orbit or bring it back down to Earth?
So I don't know how familiar everyone is with the Netflix show Space Force. I'm a big fan of watching the first season. It had some great sound bites that easily summarize some of these questions I got from family and friends. And one of those questions is, why don't we just blow it up? They said it in Space Force. I've been asked a half dozen times, and it's a good question. It works a lot on the ground. Something's in the way, a tree blocks a river, blow it up. The problem at space is the lack of some of the atmospheric conditions that would, 1, retain the initial explosion, and 2, the shrapnel. So I'm going to go back to that problem slide. So each one of these pictured pieces of debris is moving at 17,000 miles per hour, 7.6 kilometers per second if you're metric. And at that speed, orbital speeds, there is a ratio that was determined by Don Kessler and some of his colleagues. And Don Kessler is the originator of the term Kessler syndrome, this scenario where each one of these pieces we see pictured hits another piece, and it's the worst game of domino humanity's ever seen. The problem is that ratio of 1 to 1,250. So if we blew up that rocket body that we had captured, and even one of those small pieces hits another object that we don't have controlled, it can explode it. A scenario or an analogy that works on Earth level is a cantaloupe and a Jeep Wrangler. If I were to throw a cantaloupe at a Jeep Wrangler, my friend would laugh and you don't have to clean their windshield. If I were to throw it at orbital speeds, 1, I'm the strongest human that's ever lived, and 2, I've now blown up the Jeep. That's what happens when you have objects collide at orbital speeds, is it's a catastrophic collision that explodes the other object just from the force and the mass that's applied to it. So we don't want to blow it up. We don't want anyone to blow it up. And it was a very bad thing when Russia and others have done their ASAT tests. So it's something we at KMI and others in the ADR community were delighted to hear even the limited aspect of the ban for direct assault anti-satellite tests by the United States, and some other partners are coming online for it, because blowing it up is our least favorite of almost any option I've heard. That's my least favorite. So that's why we don't just blow it up.
No, that's a great answer. And I'm sure a lot of people were wondering that as well. We had a question come in from Aaron. He was wondering if you're working on the software, hardware, or both. How did you guys come to fruition with all of this?
Yeah. So we are working on both. The software is Tumblr that was created by our co-founder, Adam Call. He did his work at NASA after his thesis, AIML. Wicked smart. I love to steal the line from, what was it, Good Will Hunting? My boys are wicked smart, because they are. And then we have Reach. So that's the other co-founder, Austin. He did his work with DoD and Army, and this project itself started with NASA, JPL, DARPA, and USC. So we are taking elements that we created ourselves or developing beyond what they initially were standard. So we were working both the software and hardware. And I think there was another part of that. Oh, where did it all come from? So that's where those technologies came from. But as for us ourselves, how are these random people coming from nowhere? Is we were curious. We started all as students, the three of us, myself, Austin, and Adam. We're all students at Northern Michigan University, go Wildcats. And we met during their freshman year. I was an older student there, got to meet them all because Austin is my brother. And we graduated, went on to our careers, working corporates, and weren't loving it. So we said, okay, if we were to go back to our dreams, what did we want to do? Space, aerospace. And we heard about rocket launches happening, and some guy was going to try and re-land rockets, and there were these people who were going to, put up 1,000 satellites. It was 2019. Things were kind of exciting. Things were happening. And so we put our ideas together, started testing them out, and any neat space idea we had ran into the problem of space debris. In our lifetimes, we're just far too young to ignore this problem. It will be a problem. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Is it the worst scenario where it's in about 8 years, or is it in a more conservative experiment where it's in 16 years? Both of those are within my career lifespan. So let's start at first principles. How do we solve this? How do we fix it? And we've grown. We've expanded our team. We've brought on funding. And so from 2019, our beginning, to right now, 2022, we've established some contracts. We've established some work, but just a group of guys chasing after an idea and checking with a lot of smarter experts, a lot. We actually had the silver lining of the pandemic. It gave us this kind of virtual opportunity we all have now to check with a lot of people who were suddenly sitting at their office without anything to do. We gave them something to do. So it's something that we've really enjoyed, the opportunities and the assistance we've gotten this far. But that's just a little bit about the story of where we came from, as well as where the technology really got its start.
Oh, I think that's so motivational and so inspiring, especially if there are any students watching this or somebody that's thinking about a second career or going back to school, but they've caught the space bug. They're interested. I mean, there's so many different ways you can contribute to space. I mean, all of us, there's room for everybody in space, whether it's doing something with space debris, whether it's working on satellites, whether it's just in communications or being an engineer that wants to take their skills to a new level. So I think your story of how you guys came together is also something that's really representing where we are with the dream here, not just in America, but all over the world, of doing something that's going to help solve new problems that are coming up that we weren't facing decades ago. One of the other questions here, and this is actually a good question. Sabrina was wondering, have you studied the legal implications of being able to grab space debris? For an example, if you grab a country's satellite, but then they decide to take legal action against the cleanup company.
Yep. So the UN Outer Space Treaty, which has a much longer name, and if you try and read the original document, humanity should have done a better job keeping it. It's a copy of a copy. So that is the bedrock that many of the space law policies found out of. And it's exactly to that point, to a worse degree. It's not just they might seek legal action. The lettering and phrasing of the UN Space Treaty, as it reads now to some of the space lawyers I've talked with, is it would be an act of war. I'm a big fan of living. I'm a big fan of living not in a war zone or being taken in for war crimes. So I'm going to choose to not take those actions. And that's where we look at it. It's really developed under the UN treaty, and then some of the agreements and policies and treaties that have followed after there of nation states. So as a US company working with our US government, we would be under all clear for that. And that's where contracts come in really important. So I'm going to go to our business model page, which helps talk about this a little bit for contracts. It's not something that even today, if you see a car on the side of the road, it doesn't just get picked up by the first tow truck that goes past it. It's either an establishment with the insurance behind that vehicle, the operator of that vehicle, or if there is neither of the previous, it's with the government that it falls under that jurisdiction. And that's unfortunately a very good model for what we're looking at. Is for the debris removal contracts, it's going to be with the reinsurance companies. It's going to be with space agencies, whether they are military or civilian. And how do we take this debris out of the way? The same as that ESA contract is working for that object by 2025. On the other side is the contracts for debris repurposing, and that'll be a lot more business to business. But again, you have that contract established to prevent those egg on the face issues later, those miscommunications of, wait, I wasn't clear with you taking that. We still wanted to use that for a reason, as well as avoiding a lot of those international problems that could develop there further. Now, there's only been 1 or 2 cases where anyone's actually pursued legal action from one country dropping an object on another, but we don't want to be the third. So we're really looking to not set that precedence and really working in the friendliest and most open-faced way of, there are thousands of objects up there, 17,000, 32,000, 35,000, if you should vary your size that you're looking at. There's enough objects for us to go after stuff that has contracts. We don't quite need to worry yet about, well, no one's claimed this piece of debris from, 85. At that point, that is a great problem to have. And I look forward to having this conversation in a few years so that we can figure that out. But at this point, it's a lot of working with the partners early, often, and throughout so that everyone knows what's above board.
And I see on here, you put that you have a 105 million ESA contract for removal by 2025. Do you have any other major goals or what you would like to accomplish in the next 5 years with other space agencies or organizations, such as with France or Germany and whatnot?
I will clarify that contract is not one that KMI has been awarded. That is for ClearSpace, but that broke the mold in the best way. Luc Piget and his team over in Switzerland, they are kind of leading the way on a lot that no one thought any government would ever pay. I think the going rate before that contract came out was an Intelsat CEO or executive said, I'll pay $10,000 for debris removal. You can't launch anything to space for $10,000. So so we're very happy that someone else has won that contract. Our contracts are still in contracting, so I can't give a dollar amount now. But yes, very much looking for additional opportunities. We do have some conversations going with those that are international, but most of them are US based. In the last few years here, I don't have a slide for that one. Here we go. In the last year or two, we've seen conversations from both Space Force as well as with private industry signaling that the country and the industry is ready for active debris removal. There's a lot of demonstration that needs to take place, a lot of bugs and kinks to still iron out. But General David Thompson of the US Space Force said, I'll pay by the ton if they can remove debris. And we took his word on that. So KMI is working with Space Force in a number of elements that we'll be excited to talk about in coming weeks, but also working with NASA, NSF, and a few other agencies that fall under the IC umbrella for how can we move this forward. And it's not just for the American flag, it's for the people. It's for all. We keep it as our mantra and as our tagline, as our first and last thing we start with. KMI is keeping space clear for all. And that's all. So we are so excited to talk with our partners from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Switzerland, India. There's conversations happening around the world, and we like to do our part to facilitate in those as we can.
Great. And if there was a way that we wanted to stay up to date with those conversations, do you have a website you can maybe put in the chat or an email, or who would be the best person to contact with to continue this conversation?
Yep, we are active on almost every social media channel. So that's sometimes the easiest way is find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's Call Morris or at Call Morris. My personal email I put out there despite all the fears I've ever been told from teachers growing up. But our website is callmorris.com. We try and keep it simple, try and keep it open and transparent, but more than happy to engage in one-on-one conversations or follow-up conversations, either with myself, my technical team, or the whole team at large. We only got this far by working with colleagues, working with partners, and having hard conversations of, all right, I think your technology is wrong, Troy. Prove it's right. And that finds out a lot of solutions. So more than happy to engage with people in social media. Through our website, you can sign up for our mailing list to find out about that newest information that's released. See our bi-weekly columns where we discuss some of the topics of why you shouldn't blow it up. What happens if you put a bunch of nukes below a satellite? Some interesting topics, but otherwise it's just we try and be open, we try and be available.
Awesome. We have another question, and I think that'll wrap up this session. Aaron wants to know the difference between your organization and ClearSpace.
So there's a number of organizations that are looking at active debris removal. Astroscale is a very large one. They're doing a lot of great work in many elements. They actually have their LCD mission up in space right now. And ClearSpace is the one that's operating out of Switzerland. Those are really the two first and biggest horses in this race. And they're doing great things. ClearSpace is working with ESA to go after and capture a Vespa adapter that came off of a rocket a few years ago. it's a specific mission, go to their website. They've got a great ConOps right on the landing page. I think it's clearspace.today. Clearspace, you'll find them. And Astroscale is doing their ELSA-D mission for magnetic adapters to capture. The problem we found is exactly what's on the screen here, is we're at KMI looking at the debris that's lacking infrastructure. With the Vespa adapter, we have some great nominal data for it and how it's moving and how it's adapting, aiding ClearSpace in an extremely difficult mission. Astroscale is working with OneWeb and others, and they brought their target for their ELSA-D demonstration that's over our heads right now. And that's great. It helps prevent future satellites, future spacecraft from becoming additional debris. But our differentiation is really, we're looking at the unprepared objects. Agnostically, uncontrolled, unprepared, uncooperative, uncommunicative, they're not helping, but we're going to be there and take care of it anyways. And we've got a number of great partners out there, really is what I consider them, less than competition, but partners working on preventing more debris. And we're very excited to be working with them in the many elements we are.
Oh, that's great, Troy. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think Troy hit the nail on the head of how we're working together with organizations, with other agencies, because at the end of the day, we're all here to help each other out and to make a difference. And what your company might be doing is going to complement another company, or they might be doing something you're not doing. And so that's what just goes to show the power about space and why we're having these conversations and getting excited to not just do things with our generations, but inspire future generations in our decades to come, because they're the ones where all these impacts are going to really be seen within even the next decade. So Troy, that was great. Now, before we go to our little break at lunch hour, I would like to introduce a friend of mine, actually, that I got to meet through the satellite conference a few years ago, Creole O'Neil. Now, I knew Creole when he was working for his previous company, Spire, and recently he is just doing great things. He started his own. He's inspiring, and I love his passion for space. I don't have a bio, so I'm going to let Creole talk a little bit about himself and his goals and what he's doing. But Creole, we're so glad to have you here. And as a friend, congratulations on your new ventures. I'm really excited to hear more about this.
Thanks, Meredith. I very much appreciate the intro. And I apologize for the background noise because I am actually taking this conference from something that's very apropos for this discussion, which is I'm at the Special Operations Forces Industry Conference in Tampa, Florida this weekend. And I think it's very interesting because there are not a lot of space companies here. There are a lot of big primes that do space work, but there are not a lot of smaller space companies. And I'll dig into that here in a minute, but a little bit about my background. So I started off in the Army a long time ago. I moved into doing foreign service work where I sort of became an expert in the geopolitics and economics of space. And so I was helping the US government in negotiations and building partnerships with allies across the world and in figuring out how money and resources and things were being spent in space by various nations. So I come at space from a geopolitics and grand strategy perspective. When I left the government, I went over to Spire Global. I helped them build business with the United States and a couple of other governments, which is where I met Meredith and a bunch of other wonderful folks. But back to my earlier point, being here at the conference, there's not a lot of smaller space organizations here presenting their wares, talking with folks. There are a handful, but not many. And if we're talking about national security space, one of the things that I see is there's not a lot of traction between these organizations and what the mission really is. And at the end of the day, folks here are the folks that are going to use the data, the capabilities, and the on-orbit architecture to do a lot of the things that we're talking about, right? This is, the ultimate customer. When Space Force builds a lot of these systems, or when the intelligence community builds a lot of these systems, it's to get data to the guys on the ground, right? And we may lose sight of that a lot of the time in the industry when we talk about commercial space this and commercial space that. We are putting up architecture to collect data. Space is still a hardware game. It's not a data game. If you want to collect information, you need systems to collect those bits and bytes. And if you're using a small satellite, then you have a limited mission. So having conversations with these folks and being plugged into this community is one of the things that my new consulting firm that we've started is trying to help facilitate with a lot of space startups and other defense-oriented organizations that come from an innovative background. Either they're coming from Silicon Valley or they're coming from New York or wherever else, and they want to do great things. Or they're coming from overseas and they want to know how to do business in the United States and the United States government. And we try to help facilitate that because it can be a pretty ridiculous realm to get into. A lot of it doesn't make sense. There's arcane regulations, you have ITAR and USML, and it can get very confusing. Part of it's also that some of these groups have a hard time understanding what specific mission it is, right? I want to build all these great capabilities and capacities, but I'm not sitting in there with the individual who's pushing the buttons or doing the work at the facility, like at Space Force, or down here in Tampa at SOCOM, or whatever the case may be. And if you're not designing it to fit that need, you're going to run into a lot of problems. And we see that with a lot of these new space startups. They've created a lot of very interesting capabilities, but it's not exactly the capability that the US government wants. Maybe it's more commercial, but they're having a problem selling commercially and they want to pass it over into the government. Well, they've already created something on orbit that isn't quite what they want, so they're going to have a problem with that sale. And we try to help mitigate that issue from the beginning. Let's unpack the sort of financial underpinnings of space. And we talk about commercial space. We have to understand that the vast majority of that is still government funding. And we all in this industry, in this realm, we want to see a future where humans are expanding through the solar system and going to new planets and spreading colonies and doing all of that wonderful, interesting stuff. Like, I've been a space cadet since I was a kid, so I firmly believe in that. But that's point B. Point A, you have to have a very realistic understanding of what point A is, and that is the check is cut by the US government, allied governments, and a few others, both civil and defense, right? It's not just defense, there's a ton of civil work. But there's a Western pot of money, and even in that Western pot of money, there's barriers up between various organizations and governments. And then there's like a Chinese pot of money, right? And you can't take money from a Chinese pot and the US pot, you take it from one or the other. And that's just a geopolitical reality. And then when you boil it down, so a lot of us here in the United States, we're working with the government. If I want to do business in Australia, I have this wonderful capability in this company. I may be able to get a few contracts, but as that progresses, the Australian government is going to want you to put a facility there with Australian employees where the money is staying in Australia. And that is the same for any country that you go to. So you start to run into this situation where you can't just do business from the United States or Europe or wherever else. You're going to have to start obeying those structured laws in countries around the world. And that can be really difficult for a lot of new space startups to understand. And it gets complicated. So you run into these heavy regulatory issues and these geopolitical problems that you have to sort out pretty quickly. And you really have to be set up to sort it out from the start. If you try to do it after the fact, it ends up costing you a lot more money. And that actually it can destroy organizations pretty quickly. And I've seen it happen, unfortunately. And you can't let hubris run your business, right? Don't bring ego to the table, because that will not sit well with any government. I've seen organizations try to tell various governments that they know better what to do in space. Well, if you go talk to the ODNI, they very fondly say, look at the table that you're sitting at. This table is what, for instance, the United States government can do and collect in space. It's all wonderful. And then they say, look at the speck of dust in the corner. To date, that is what commercial industry has provided us. So don't bring your ego to the table. You're going to ask questions and find solutions. You're going to get regulatory help. You're going to get the approvals. You don't want to pretend you're the next Jeff Bezos of space. It doesn't work that way. And why has this kind of borne out? Why are we in this situation? I like to say that space has two brains, and this goes back to the original space race, right? Kennedy, there's a very famous tape of him in the Oval Office where he's talking with his science advisor, And he's saying, well, why can't going to the moon just be about American preeminence in space, about doing all this great work, showing off what we're capable of? Yeah, Jeff Bezos, Jeff. And Kennedy says, I don't care about that. I care about beating the Russians. Now, when we went to the moon and we got there and we said, we come in peace for all mankind, did those folks believe that when they said it? 100% they did. Absolutely. Did everyone going to the moon and working on that mission believe that? Absolutely. And so from the beginning, you've had a diversion in the brain that is space. You had a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And that has persisted to this day. And so I've tried for a long time to bridge that gap, right? Because there's, again, that whole point A to point B analogy where we want to get to point B, but we need to take the money from point A to get there, right? This is why I respect Elon Musk, regardless of how crazy he is. He's done that very well. He went after a very specific inefficiency in the market. He built a capability to do that, and he is fine selling rockets and bandwidth to the Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, to governments across the world, because he knows that money is going to take his company to Mars. Right, that's his goal. He's going there. He's going to do what he needs to do to get there. So, another good example of this is we look at the commercial satellite communications market as something that's fairly commercial, when in reality it's not. The Department of Defense's commercial SATCOM budget is almost $2 billion a year. And that's just for leasing bandwidth. That is not for the satellites that they put into space for their own commercial SATCOM. Starlink is predominantly paid for by the DoD. Kuiper will predominantly be paid for by the DoD and other allied governments, right? It's not necessarily anything wrong with that, because then it puts that capability out there. Now, if you're in a remote village, you can get gigabit internet connection in the middle of nowhere, right? But also the US Navy wants that, because if I'm in the middle of the ocean and all I have is MUOS to run my comms on, as a former warfighter, I can tell you it's not a very good system to have. You only get a little bit of data, right? But the other thing is, you want to be able to provide this capacity to underserved locations, right? But underserved locations aren't going to pay the bill, especially for an expensive overhead constellation. So again, point B, you want to do all this good work, but you have to come from point A where the money is. So that is a lot of what we try to help with in making this cross connection between smaller companies who want to get into this industry, and getting them to the point where they have products that are going to get them the money to make this mission happen, to do good work, and then to spread human capacity in space. So that's really what Delta V does, and what we're trying to do with a lot of companies. There's a lot of great organizations out there, and we work with a few of them. So I'm going to stop there and then open up the questions. I'm sure folks will have some.
Thank you so much, Creole. That's such great information. And as we've kind of had the theme all day today, it's just so exciting to see the different paths and avenues that people are taking to go out and find that niche for them in space. And so anyone that's watching on our LinkedIn stream or here, if you have questions for Creole, please post them. We do have one that came in that was wondering, are there any space companies out there working in multiple countries with multiple offices? It seems like it's a hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing to do. And yes, there are a number of companies doing that. My former employer, Spire, is one of them. They have offices all over the place. Hawkeye is another one that has offices all over the place. There are Dawn Aerospace. Love those guys. They have great capabilities. They started in New Zealand. They have an office in the Netherlands, and one of their guys just came to New York. A very good friend of mine, Josh Rhea. He is in New York working on U.S. business, right? So yes, it can be done. Now you have to be very careful about it, because if you spread that footprint too quickly, and a lot of companies will do it because they'll get investment money from various governments and organizations, but there's a hook on that, right? If you take investment money from, say, Luxembourg or somebody else, you're on the hook to then put jobs and money into that economy, and you have to be very careful about that, because you make that promise, but maybe you don't deliver, and then you got to pay it back, and it can be very difficult. So yes, it can be done. The geopolitics are a problem. They are navigable. It's not an end all be all, right? It is something that it can be worked around. You just have to have the right people do it. The real problem is expanding too quickly and trying to do too much. So, Peter Thiel, for whatever he is, I agree with his statement that you want to be a monopoly in a niche, right? And then you want to expand from there. So be very smart about what you're trying to do. Be very good at it. Make sure you have the right initial customers. Go from there, right? And then expand. If you're in the US or if you're in the 5i network, okay, you have a built-in arrangement right there, right? If you're in Australia, well, then you have opportunities in New Zealand, you've got opportunities in the UK and Canada and the United States right off the bat. You also have opportunities in Europe. If you're in Europe, or even if you're in places like Africa, I talk with a lot of African organizations. There are awesome opportunities between Africa and Europe. Same in South America. There's a lot of opportunities to go from South America to Europe and even into the United States. So these can happen. You just have to be very careful about groundwork and then about the money and the expenditures.
Awesome. That was a great question. Thank you so much. She's giving you a thumbs up. Thank you, Darnell. Again, if you're just joining us now, make sure to put those questions in, get them out there. Creole, like I said, I know you when you were working for a different company, and now you've kind of just went and you're doing your own thing. Do you have advice for people that might have their own ideas and their own dreams? They want to take that entrepreneurial route. I know you just kind of touched a little bit on that, but do you have any tips where to start? Is it networking with people you already know, or is it, following business models of something that you're passionate about and then kind of making it your own?
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things. So, if you're doing hardware work, right, or software, and you have a great idea, you want to network out the wazoo. Talk with as many people as you possibly can. Tell them enough, not too much. That's a hard line to define, right? You want to get folks excited. And then it's a matter of finding the venture capital or the private investor or, a bank loan, whoever's going to do it, right? One of the big things I caution folks in the space industry in particular is to stay away from VCs as much as possible, because a lot of what we perceive as the big space folks are going through a very hard time right now, where they're not generating a lot of cash. Again, because they didn't build to the government mission first and foremost. And now they're hemorrhaging money. They're just hemorrhaging money. And VCs who've invested in them thinking this is going to be the next Apple or Amazon or whatever, they're expecting a hockey stick return. And one of the most important things to understand about space is it's very much like a defense business. You're going to get about a 15% year-on-year growth, right? You may get big kicks when you add new missions. So you're adding a new capability, the government buys into it, then it becomes a program of record. This is not, we collect the data once and sell it 1,000 times. The data is very niche. Not, average American Joe or average US or world consumer isn't going to buy space data. And I know there was a lot of talk of farmers and agriculture and insurance companies, and they just don't buy that much information, right? And you're never going to get that type of return that the VCs want. So be very careful in doing that and talking to those folks. With the rest of it and starting out, it's I've always had the philosophy that if I go into a reception or a conference or whatever the case may be, I'm going to have 100 conversations. Of those 100 conversations, 10 of them are going to turn out to be something interesting. 5 will, maybe get back to me, and then out of those 5, I'll get 1 or 2, right? So 100 to 1 or 2, and then you have to keep doing that. And remember that if you're trying to start something, you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed, and that is okay. You have to do that. You just have to keep smacking away at it, because at some point, if you have a good product or you have a good service, it will hit. And as you generate those relationships and you help people out, those folks will come back to help you.
No, that's absolutely true. And, you're so passionate about networking, and I am too. I mean, that's why a lot of people will go to these conferences, whether it's with their companies or on their own, because you give what you put into something. And if you're passionate about something, yes, it may cost a little more now, or it may take a little more time to make those connections and those establishments. But like you said, you have to have as many conversations as possible. You have to reach out to as many people. And yes, the return will be small in the beginning, but just like anything else in life, when we work hard, when we believe in ourselves, we believe in our dreams and our goals, we are going to accomplish what we want to do. It's just the timing has to be there. And I think you are a great example of the networking that you've done, and just kind of created your own dream and circle. And now people are starting to come back and say, hey, I like what you're doing. And then they make the connections. And next thing you know, you've got connections with a bunch of people you ever even know.
Absolutely. And it's worldwide. It's so much fun to be able to help people, not just in the US, but across the globe, try to make this happen and make it work, right? Because I, like everyone else here, I would love to be out in space. I'd love to have a real space economy, right? Where it's not just a terrestrial economy with a space services component, which is what we have. I would love to see a space commodities futures market, right? Where, you're actually having a futures contract on things that are being built and sold to other people in space. That is when you have a real space economy. That's what I want to see. But it's hard to get there, right? So a lot of it is just trying to help folks out, trying to make that happen. And it is very rewarding. The networking is great. Yeah, you're right, Meredith. I love networking. It is what I'm good at. But it's fun to just help people. That's really what it boils down to.
Oh, I can agree 100%. I mean, if it's not helping somebody that's going to help you back now down the road, it could be that one call or that one connection that's going to change your whole life. And so you just never know who you're going to meet. And I think that's why events like this, Conversations for the Future, is so important, because you're going to meet people you might never have met any other way. Maybe they can't go to a conference, or they're just getting started, so they don't have the funds to be out and about networking. And so do you have any closing advice to people based on, your experience with being in space, or for maybe the kids or the people who are interested in going into space and maybe breaking from a normal career into something that's going to be life-changing for them?
Yeah, so two segments to that. If you are on the hardware side, if you're on the engineering side, do as much as you can to be the best at what you do, right, at that technology. If you're on the business side of it, do what you can to get a good understanding of both the government side and the commercial side, whether that's working for a large prime like Lockheed or Boeing or Ball Aerospace. Or in Europe, you're talking about Thales and Ariane and all those folks. Or you're working for a government institution that does a lot of space work. Get that knowledge, right? Because that's going to give you a built-in network. That's going to help you understand how the game is played. Going back to my previous comments, all of this, whether we want to admit it or not, is largely driven by geopolitics, right? The U.S. is concerned about what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese are concerned about what the U.S. is doing. Russia used to be a player, but Ukraine has kind of ruined that for them. So a lot of this is driven by the geopolitics. When you understand that, and then you understand these arcane laws that go into doing business internationally, that's going to help set you apart. Because then when you create that great product, you're going to have a built-in network. You're going to have friends that you can call on, and then you're going to have the knowledge to help execute. So, on the engineering side, it really is. There's no substitute for being really, really good at what you do. And I've had the blessing of being able to work with a lot of very capable, intelligent people throughout my career who just come up with the most science fiction stuff. And it's amazing. But you have to marry that with real business work, right? How do we make this into an actual business, or how do we make this into a government program? So, yeah, that's the best advice I can give, is don't be afraid of taking the time to accumulate your expertise and your network. That is invaluable in doing any of this stuff and understanding how the game is actually played. I like to say this is how space fits into the game of empires, because that's really what it is.
No, that's a great way to put it. And if people want to reach out with you, if they want to network with you, do you want to drop your email, your LinkedIn? Can people find information in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I will drop my contact information in the chat. as well as my website, deltavspace.com. You can reach us there if you need help. We just want to chat. We are in Washington, D.C. typically, so also if you're in the area, we can hang out and have a drink. I am more than happy to just talk off the record with folks too. Don't need to pay for it, so.
No, that's awesome. Like you said, and like I think the common theme today is helping each other out and making a difference. And so, Creole, we are so happy to have had you today for Conversations for the Future. And this is going to wrap up our morning session, unless anyone has any last questions they want to throw in the chat. But Creole's putting his information in there, so you can check that out. But a big thanks to everybody who spoke this morning. I know it's been a long day already because we've had so many good conversations. It's just drawn us in. So if you need to get up, if you need to walk around, take a stretch break, get some more coffee, have a snack, this is the time to do it. And then coming up this afternoon, the face of space, I'm going to coin that phrase. Tim Chrisman will be joining us, and he will be moderating for the afternoon because I have my own duties for giving the weather forecast here across the tri-state area, and of course the latest in space news. But just, you know, coming up this afternoon, we are from 12 to 12:30, Michael Palusek. We have Joy Schaffler from 12:30 to 1. And then from 1 to 2, we have a panel with John Weathersby. So there are 3 fantastic people that you will get to hear from this afternoon. But thank you again for having me. I love having these conversations, getting them started, and also sharing my passion for space with you as well. I'll throw my information as well in the chat if you want to reach out concerning storytelling or networking and whatnot. I've been in the media business for the last 14 years, but I've also really started to get involved in the space community, and whether it's moderating a panel for your organization or a conference you're having or doing something like this or being on a panel, with my background in space and science and things that I've done with storytelling, please reach out. I really would love to connect. And again, thanks everybody for a great morning session.
Thanks, Meredith. And as she said, we'll take a quick stretch break and be back here at the top of the hour to listen to Michael as he talks about nuclear fusion propulsion for space missions. So see you back here soon. off the afternoon here with Michael. Michael's here to talk, as I mentioned before the break, about, well, you can see it on the screen, fusion propulsion for space missions. Michael Paluzik is the president of the Princeton Satellite Systems. He has over 40 years of experience in the space and energy sectors. He actually started Princeton Satellite Systems in 1992. And despite all of this being called Princeton, he actually has an SB, an SM, and EAA degrees from MIT. I'm sure there's a story there. Maybe we'll get that. He's also the author of numerous papers. Thankfully, we don't have to list them all here, and has multiple patents that he has either been the inventor or co-inventor on. Right now, though, his work is focused on power electronics for the nuclear fusion industry, which is really starting to come into its own. And so we're excited to have you here, Michael, and hear what you have to say. The screen's yours.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. So we're going to start off with some equations. And the reason we're doing this is because it's good to understand a little fundamental physics when talking propulsion. Now, if you can absorb all this on this one slide, this makes you a rocket engineer. So the top equation is the rocket equation, in a little bit different form than you may be used to seeing it. Usually it just says the ratio of the initial and final masses are that exponent. But here we introduce a very important factor called F, which is a tankage fraction, which means that for every kilogram of fuel, you need F kilograms of tankage or pipes or whatever else to store it. And the reason this is important is that in the limit, we see the next equation that for a given exhaust velocity and a given F, we're limited to how much velocity change we can get. So this is a limit as the mass of fuel goes to infinity. And it's really important to understand this because a lot of people will tell you about their propulsion concepts, in particular single-stage orbit people, ignoring this and not understanding why they actually can't get into orbit. So now when we talk about electric propulsion or fusion or fission propulsion, we get down to the power equation. And if you fiddle with this a bit, you'd see this just kinetic energy, power, kinetic energy times time. But what it tells you is that the power needed in your exhaust plume is a product of the thrust, the exhaust velocity, and the divided by the efficiency. That's a power conversion efficiency. So if your power plant produces 1 megawatt, you get eta 1 megawatt into your actual exhaust plume. Now, if you go back up and look at our equation for the rocket equation, we'll see that the exhaust velocity ultimately determines how big a delta V you can get. So you say, well, gee, if I use any kind of laser or a pointer is not very useful propulsion system, even though it can produce thrust. In fact, in space, people are working on solar, and solar pressure actually pushes ComSats around. So this is just to give you a background of information as we discuss things further. So here's a little bit of the big picture. And on the left-hand side, the diagram shows you all sorts of different propulsion systems. They're Hall thrusters, magnetoplasmodynamic thrusters, ion, chemical in the upper left-hand corner. That's our space shuttle main engines now for the Space Launch System. Nuclear light bulb is an idea where you have a fission reactor, which is gaseous, and it's just radiating through a quartz window to heat the working fluid. And then there's nuclear thermal. PUF is a fission fusion hybrid being worked on by Marshall. And there are some other ones. But that gives you an idea of what range of thrust and exhaust velocity we can expect, because the physics of a device will limit the relationship between thrust and exhaust velocity. In other words, you can't, for a given engine, for example, you can't get down to zero thrust and really high exhaust velocity. There'll be a limit on both. And the right-hand diagram just shows you the maximum delta V for different types. So direct fusion drive is what I'm going to talk about in detail today. But Vasimir is something being developed by Chang Diaz, an ex-NASA astronaut. There's the nuclear electric Hall thruster. Now, nuclear electric is you take a nuclear reactor, just like on Earth, you produce electric power, then you drive an electric thruster. And that means you need a lot of heavy power electronics. Nuclear thermal is what the Draco program, which is DARPA and some other people are working on. And then there's chemical, and that's our space shuttle main engine again. So here's some ideas. Radioisotopes, they're being used on a lot of NASA missions. And in fact, the Voyager spacecraft have them. They're still operating. They just got some data back from Voyager, and the telemetry is kind of messed up, but it's still working. New Horizons use them, and so on and so forth. They tend to be very, very heavy and only produce 100 watts. Dragonfly, the new Titan aircraft, is going to have a 70-watt RTG. Kilopower is a new NASA project where they're building a fission electric system, and they've actually tested a ground version of a 10 kilowatt reactor producing power. The thing on the top is the radiator. So with any kind of these conversion systems that are associated with nuclear electric power, they tend to be in the efficiency of about 20%. And I should go back, and the radioisotope ones are 5%. Kilopower, which is using a Stirling cycle, might get up to 20%. Then there's the fission, small fusion, which we're talking about. And that picture on the left-hand side is JMO, the Jupiter Icy Moon Orbiter mission. That was going to be a big fission plant, and the wings on it are the radiators. And the right-hand side is just gigantic fusion, which you have to build in space. So I would argue that scientific return is proportional to power, which is why you want more power. You have to power your instruments, and then any data you get back has to be transmitted, and more or less the data rate is proportional to power, all of the things being equal. So here's, in this diagram, shows you the dollars per watt for these missions. Dragonfly, I mentioned, is $14 million per watt. It's a very complicated vehicle. It's going to fly on Titan, so that's why it's so expensive. But on New Horizons, which has been flying for a while, went past Pluto several years ago, it's $3 million a watt. JMO was going to be a breakthrough. It was going to be $160,000 a watt, which is a lot more than a power plant used on Earth that you use to power your home. But JMO was going to be, the concept was, it's going to be a NASA standard spacecraft for deep space missions. But it started off with a price tag of $16 billion, and it was canceled. So what's the advantage of fusion as opposed to fission? Well, one of the advantages of fusion, in particular what we're looking for, is that we're going to produce thrust directly from the exhaust products of the products of the fusion reaction. So rather than going through an intermediate conversion to electricity cycle, we're going to use it directly. This gets rid of a lot of heavy power electronics, which is important. And you end up with a specific power, which is another critical number. You always have to ask, what is the ratio of kilowatts produced by the power plant, or even in the exhaust plume? You could use either one. You have to be careful about how people are defining specific power. Sometimes they leave out the power electronics, for example, and to the mass of your power plant, because that is ultimately going to determine the overall performance of your system. And for any given specific power and any given mission, there's going to be an optimal exhaust velocity. So ideally, your system can produce exhaust velocities around that number, and then the corresponding thrust, which will determine how fast you can get to the velocity you want to. And the advantage of fusion is that if you're using deuterium helium-3, as we would be using in a power system or propulsion system, you don't have any radioactive fuels. If you're using tritium, you have to have tritium gas, which is radioactive. You have to be careful about handling that. Obviously, for fission reactors, you have to deal with very radioactive materials. And what they all have in common, though, is radiators, because you have waste heat. You have to have conversion systems. We're looking at Brayton. There are other things. There are Rankine cycles. There are other kind of cycles you can use. Everybody has to store fuel. A nuclear thermal engine is going to have cryogenic hydrogen as a fuel. We're going to have deuterium and helium-3. They all have to be stored. And any kind of nuclear system will need shielding, either to protect the engine from itself or people around it. So here's some of goals we would like. We'd like to get to Mars in 3 months, less than a Hohmann transfer, Jupiter in a year, asteroid mining, people are talking about that. Cost is money, or time is money in those cases. Planetary defense, it's inevitable the Earth is going to be hit by a gigantic asteroid, which is going to wipe out the Earth. So we'd like to be able to stop them. NASA has a mission now to try to deflect that asteroid. So what are we looking for in the fusion engine? Well, we want a specific impulse greater than 10,000 seconds, an exhaust velocity you multiply by 9.806, and that's what we'd like to get. So that's a goal. Specific power, 1 to 10 kilowatts per kilogram. Current concepts for fission electric are like 0.02. And then we don't want to launch nuclear materials just because it makes life easier. This is the conceptual design of our fusion power, roughly to scale on the lunar surface. And so what are the options? On the right, we say RTGs, can build them now, and they're flying all over the place, 200 watts. The fission, like the one I showed you earlier, kilopower is 5 to 50 kilowatts. PFRC, which is a Princeton field reverse configuration developed at the Plasma Physics Lab, which we're working on, we've licensed the technology, is up to 10 megawatts. So here's one mission, hybrid Mars. And this is the idea we had here was we use nuclear thermal to get us out of low Earth orbit, and then we use fusion for everything else. So this gives you some of the trajectories. The first one on the right-hand side is a spiral. Once we've gotten to a high enough altitude with nuclear thermal, and then we have the transfer to Mars, and then we have the insertion burn. So it shows you the different modes that you have to go through. The table on the left gives you the velocity change, which is often what we talk about. That goes back to the rocket equation. And the idea in this mission is we don't use aerobraking. People are talking about Hohmann transfers with chemical to Mars inevitably have to use aerobraking. Otherwise, they'd use much, much too much fuel. So what can you do with a fusion engine? Well, you can get to Jupiter in a year, Saturn in 2 years, Pluto in 5 years, and you don't have to do swing bys. It lessens the complexity of the mission. And the other thing you have to realize is that operating a spacecraft in deep space costs anywhere from $20 to $50 million a year. So you save yourself a lot of money. Here's another mission, which is exciting. The idea is to send a probe to the at least 650 astronomical unit point from the sun. And you then use the sun as a gravitational lens. And by translating the spacecraft back and forth, you can scan a planet around another solar system. This would allow you to actually get a picture almost at the resolution of a spacecraft looking at the Earth in geo. But two things are important. One, you have to get the 650 astronomical units, and two, you have to scan. Now, you can think about a solar sail or a flyby type mission, but you actually like to hover in that region. And the other thing is that there's no mechanism for scanning with those kind of systems. The solar sail does not give you any propulsion. So direct fusion drive would allow you to do this mission. And what kind of concepts besides direct fusion drive is a particular magnetic confinement configuration. Others are stellarators, tokamaks, mirror machines. There's one at University of Maryland, another University of Wisconsin being funded by ARPA-E. So there are a lot of different magnetic confinement concepts. They require you to have coils. They usually have to be superconducting. Commonwealth Fusion is working on some new high temperature ones, but for our machine, the fields are low enough to use low temperature. But that's another common point for all confinement devices. Then inertial confinement, like a laser fusion, you're just having the reactants smash into each other and fusing like in an atomic bomb, or using a laser or some other mechanical method to do that. Liner propulsion is when you produce a gigantic current which causes a liner to crush the fusion reactant, causing fusion, and then the liner is dissolved, and that produces your thrust. And the other ideas is magnetic reconnection, which happens in tokamaks all the time. And with reconnection, you get little pockets of very high compression, which might be able to produce fusion, but it's entirely theoretical at this point. So the types in general, nuclear thermal, that's what was actually proposed for follow-up Apollo missions to the moon, and essentially doubles the exhaust velocity. So you go back to the rocket equation I showed you earlier, you can see that because it's exponential, now you can get a lot more payload for a given amount of fuel. Nuclear electric is when instead of heating the hydrogen directly, you produce electric power, but then you need power conversion. And then direct fusion propulsion is any concept. Ours is one. Edward Teller had a levitated dipole, the helium-3 machine. Dipoles are interesting because the ratio of plasma pressure to magnetic pressure is about 1. And so he had a concept for that. And that would have been a gigantic, like 10 gigawatt machine. But the idea is that the fusion products, usually by having them mixed with cooler ions, produce your thrust. Again, breakdown of some of the common things for the fusion reactor. You have confinement. That's really important. How do you confine it? Magnetics, use magnets. But the important thing is that you have to be able to confine it. For a small machine, you might say, wait a second. Fusion happens because particles hit each other. But when they hit each other, they sort of bounce around. So you have to be really careful that your fusion reactants don't all leave your reactor before they fuse. All machines need radiators. That's what the JMO had, those big dragonfly-like radiators. And it's a lot of mass that has to be incorporated into the specific power. Everybody needs shielding if you're doing any kind of fusion machine. And then, of course, the propulsion is how do you get propulsion? With fusion, you could just produce electric power just like a nuclear electric, or you can do direct. So the idea is if you're using direct drive, you get rid of a lot of the power conversion and you get rid of a lot of the radiator mass. So because your system is overall more efficient. And ideally, with the concept we're looking at D-helium-3, there may be ways of reducing the DD side reactions, which are what produce the neutrons, although they're lower energy than a DT machine, and also would reduce the production of tritium, which we have to exhaust before fusion. If we don't get, then that limits the size of our machine. If our machine were too big, the tritium would fuse and you're back to having a DT machine. Tritium fuses really easily. So we have to exhaust that, and our concept is small enough so that happens. And this is just another diagram showing you days to Mars and then the specific power. So you can see as the specific power goes up, we can get to Mars a lot more quickly. Just a little aside, this is the JMO, this is Lee Mason's diagram from NASA. And this is typically what any kind of nuclear electric propulsion system would have. That's producing electric power and then driving your engines that way. Ours is like this. So here's all the elements. So we have the plasma. Actually, what's going into the heating is our cooling system is actually X-rays and RF. That's the biggest product because our temperature of our plasma is so high. As you get to higher and higher temperatures, more and more energy is radiated as X-rays or as RF. So that's where a lot of the energy is going. That it's being recycled to drive it. One of the interesting things about our fusion concept is the direct drive. In other words, the fusion products do not heat the plasma. They're exhausted. We have to produce electricity to drive the reaction. And these are some of the other subsystems. We have to cool the coils, the cryogenic cools. We have to have a startup system. If the system shuts down, we need to start up. It turns out we only need a few kilograms of fuel for a small machine to get it going again. This is a little bit more. This shows you the power flow. Whenever you look at somebody's power concept, you want to see a power flow diagram to make sure it all adds up. And the lower diagram is the Brayton cycle. And you can see it's a relatively low pressure system, but it gets efficiencies close to 50%. It does have a big recuperator. That's a heat exchanger which transmits energy heat from one stream to the other. And there's more energy being transferred in the recuperator than there is actually in the primary heat exchanger. Interestingly enough, that's just a basic thermodynamics. And this is a standard, a jet engine is the exact same thing as a Brayton cycle. To give you a comparison, this shows you roughly for a 500 kilowatt electric system, what the masses would be. And you can see all the components for like a fission, where you get 30 watts per kilogram versus fusion, where you get up to 480 watts per kilogram. Another thing to look at is some other concepts, like we're talking about a very small machine. So for a robotic mission to Pluto, the whole thing can launch on an Atlas. If you wanted to do a human Mars mission, the whole thing would launch on an SLS Block 2. Now, NASA many years ago came up with the idea of a really big fusion-powered spacecraft. It was inspired by the Discovery 2 in 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's how many SLS launches you would need to build it, would have to be built in orbit. And again, a little bit more information about our concept. This is what it looks like. So the left is the power reactor version, which would be terrestrial power. The one on the right is the propulsion system. This is a little bit more detail. The fusion plasma is in the middle. The gas box is where we introduce the gas, the low temperature ions that flow around the part of the reactor where the fusion is happening, then exhaust. This is a little bit of technical detail. We use a code actually written for tokamaks to look at the fluid dynamics around the FRC. So that's what you're seeing there, the energy being transferred in the blue area. And this is our main fusion reactor. As I mentioned, there are side reactions. So ideally, if it was all D-helium-3, you don't get any neutrons. But if you have D in it, it's going to fuse too. And that's going to give you some tritium, which you want to get rid of because you don't want it to fuse with the deuterium. And then it's going to give you neutrons, which will damage your structure. So in summary, nuclear propulsion, whether it's nuclear electric, nuclear thermal, or fusion, will enable many new missions. It'll make missions more efficient. You'll be able to put more payload. It'll speed time to Mars, all these good things. But there are a lot of challenges for all of them. These kind of radiators, we need really low mass radiators, have not flown yet. And we need to demonstrate the physics of the fusion. A lot of ideas for fusion, but none of them, except for tokamaks, have produced fusion power. Or fusors, which are electrostatic devices, which high school students build, also produce fusion, but they can't be scaled. So the things you have to show are, do you have a physics path to an engine, and do you have an engineering path? There are things which don't have either, which people are working on, and maybe they'll come up with some great ideas which will allow them to overcome those, to get those two paths, but you have to be able to demonstrate that. And reality is that a lot of money is needed to enable any of these technologies. The last estimate I saw for kilopower for an operational reactor is $2 billion. Those things are not cheap, and it's not something that a couple of inventors are going to be able to build in their garage. It's going to require constant funding for long periods of time. And almost any of these concepts are going to require 10 to 15 years before they fly. So that's it. That's my email address. Happy to answer any questions. And you can always send me an email if you have more questions you want to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That was a fantastic presentation. One thing, there's a couple questions here. The first being, what if anything is easier about making fusion propulsion for space versus fusion power for the ground?
Well, the physics are hard for both of them. The thing is that for fusion power for the ground, ultimately, your levelized cost of electricity, in other words, what you're charging the customer, has to be competitive. For space, we don't have to be competitive. We just have to produce thrust. So if you're a big company like Commonwealth Fusion, they're doing great work, they have to be concerned about the cost of every component of their machine, because otherwise, even if they have a beautiful fusion reactor that produces power, if it's 10 times as expensive as, say, a natural gas plant, who's going to buy it? I mean, they may sell some. So they have to work really hard at that. And that's why for space, it's easier. But the basic physics doesn't change. And the other difficulty in space is everything has to be low mass. You really don't care that much how heavy your reactor is on the ground, although you do have to ship the parts, and that is a part of your cost. But for space, you got to get that specific power down as low as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I saw a couple days ago that there was several companies that Defense Innovation Unit selected for some demonstration missions. What is it that's maybe similar or different for their designs? I think it was ultra safe nuclear. No, they were doing a radioisotope battery. I think it was at Avalanche Energy was the fusion one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with their technology, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they had the promise to have a demonstration in 3 years. We actually bid on DIU, but we said we couldn't have a demonstration for 10 years, so it was beyond their time frame. So, I mean, there are different ideas and people are trying different things, and it's great that people are exploring different concepts, because you just don't really know at this point which is really going to work the best.
Right. No, and that's true. And I think having, the more of these that can get rolling, the better, because
that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's great. Like DIU is funding things, DARPA's funding, NASA is funding. So what's exciting is that there are enough government agencies and private investors who are interested in funding fusion or nuclear power and propulsion. And that, I think, is going to speed innovation. I mean, if there are 100 concepts and only 3 work, so what? You have 3 working concepts. That's fantastic.
Yeah. No, and I think with, China increasingly talking about wanting to have nuclear powered propulsion, whether it's fission or fusion, that only adds fuel to the US government looking to put money into it. And so that can only help.
Absolutely. I mean, the difference is China, the money is all coming from the government.
Yeah.
Well, they do have entrepreneurs and they do have venture capital too, but the government itself was willing to spend long term. That's why the Chinese have a space station now. That's why they have a lunar lander. They beat everybody else. I mean, the last time we had a lunar lander that didn't have people in it was Surveyor.
Yeah.
And the Chinese have one operating and actually return samples, which was great. So we're in the United States, we're trying to get the private companies to do more. So Astrobotics is going to have a lunar lander hopefully this summer, and that's great. So it's in the way, the good thing about the US system is that with the venture capitalists and a lot of space enthusiasts involved in funding, there's a lot of money going towards different projects rather than saying, oh, well, tokamak is our fusion power system. We're only going to fund tokamak, which was true 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But even like the Commonwealth fusion system is a tokamak, but it's a high field tokamak, which is a different concept. And they're doing a lot of exciting work. There are people working on stellarators. As I said, both University of Wisconsin and the University of Maryland have some interesting ideas for mirrors. Mirrors make very nice rocket engines if you can get them to work. It's a challenge, but they have some ideas and they think they can overcome some of the obstacles that came up with mirrors in the 60s. And that's just great. Because even if their concept doesn't work, the physics they learn will help other people.
Right. And now everybody else knows a bunch of different roads to not go down.
Right. Yeah. Or they'll look at it and go, oh, I think I know how to solve their problem.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, with the mirrors were abandoned in the 60s for tokamaks, but they got people at University of Maryland and at University of Wisconsin said, oh, University of Wisconsin idea is really high field mirrors. University of Maryland is they spin the plasma and to solve some of the problems. And they're both cool ideas. And we're looking forward to seeing the results from that. And again, ARPA-E has done a great job. I mean, ARPA-E funded our fusion experiments. And they're also funding a lot of it. They're funding an advanced stellarator at Plasma Physics Lab. So there are many, many concepts. Now, again, these are being funded at the experiment level, not at, even let's say the people at University of Wisconsin are successful at their experiment. They're still going to need billions of dollars to make an operating machine, whether it's for space or for terrestrial applications.
Sure.
And the question is, who's going to fund that? And typically that's not something that comes out of private capital, but one model that kind of works is that for drugs. Because typically, if you're a drug investor, you invest in things that are 10 years in the future and only 1 out of 10 is successful. So if you invest in 10, and if one's successful, you made money. So that kind of investment model may apply to fission where they're going to need billions of dollars to really produce machines that work.
No, and I think that's a good analogy because especially working with investors and financial companies, they oftentimes are scared away from the new until they can connect it to something that they've done before. And so I think.
Right. Well, that makes sense. That's how you make money.
Yeah.
And the typical venture capital cycle is 3 years, which works really great for internet startups.
Right.
It doesn't work very well for industrial things, which you have to build labs. You need a lot of capital investment. TAE has billions of dollars of investment. CFS has like $2 to $3 billion, and that's maybe enough to get them to Spark, which will be a machine that'll have a gain of 2, 3 or 4. And produce fusion power. Again, it's not a complete power plant, but it'll be a huge step forward for them. So, but again, we're talking about billions of dollars to get to that point, not tens of millions.
No, it's true.
I mean, one of the advantages of our approach is that to get to a burning machine is probably no more than $100 million. So it's a lot cheaper because it's just smaller, but it's still not. not cheap.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, it's exciting technology, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where you all take it and when it gets online. So thank you for sharing today, Michael.
Thanks for having me. And as I said, anybody has any more questions, they can send me an email at any time.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks. All right. Next up, we have Joy Schaffler. Excited to bring her back. Joy is on top of being a fantastic human, she is the founder and principal of Distinctive Edge Partners. Distinctive Edge is an award-winning global communications and investor relations strategy organization. And Joy brings decades of experience building, scaling, and protecting global technology brands around the world. It's exciting to watch Joy work. She really takes a data-driven approach to marketing and communications. You hear the stories of clients she's worked with that have raised billions in capital, scaled from startups to 9-figure exits, built and scaled cutting-edge technologies, executed profitable M&As, built and scaled international sales and distribution channels, closed major customers, and ultimately created that massive shareholder value that companies look for. Joy brings vast experience educating customers, media, and investors about the applicability of new technology. She loves being on that cutting edge. She's helped devise strategies educating global markets on blockchain applicability outside of Bitcoin, work across hardware, Internet of Things, financial technology, and extensively within the artificial intelligence space on both robotics and process automation. She's a sought-after speaker and media contributor. Joy's won numerous awards, including the Women's Communications Outstanding Communicators Award, CEO Magazine's Entrepreneur of the Year, and Austin Under 40 Award. Joy previously served as an officer in the Army Reserves and the Texas State Guard, and we're excited to have you here today, Joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Tim. It's always such an honor. Well, I am excited to be here and, continue this series. Last month, we had we kind of went over marketing from high level. And this month, we're going to dig in and really share how to enhance the overall ROI of your marketing process. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So thank you, Tim, for the lovely introduction there. And, I think we all probably know the importance of getting your message out there. It's increasing investor interest. It's increasing customer interest. It's really putting yourself in the places where you want to be from both the digital as well as a in-person perspective so that you can grow your business, scale, exit, and ultimately help people, because that's what we're here to do, create value. So today we're going to walk through a 6-step process of how we're going to create this value. So, we're going to kind of dig in deep here. The last webinar we did was really high level. This time we're going to dig into more of the tactics behind it and exactly how you go about that. So, at the end of the day, everything should be determined with marketing with your goals. What is most important here is starting with the end in mind, backwards planning. So if your goals are raising capital, if your goals are expanding your team, if your goals are getting acquired, like whatever the goals are that your company has, you need to make sure as you're starting your marketing process that you're starting there and working backwards. So what do I mean by that? So for example, if you know that you're going through a hiring spree and part of your goals need to be marketing to potential employees in the corporate communications, then within your overall tactical marketing plan, you need to have LinkedIn there. You need to have, make sure you're updating your employee, kind of employee facing portal section, and that marketing, you need to market just as much to prospective employees as you do other people. If one of your goals is raising capital, then making sure the things that are most interesting to your potential investors are front and center in the type of content that you're creating and the type of people you're reaching. So everything goes back to what are my goals and kind of walking backwards to figure out exactly how you get there. Because like the cat said in Alice in Wonderland, where you want to go really depends, or how you get there really depends on where you want to go. So how do you do that, right? Like, how do you actually align your goals and your brand? So you start with that foundation, and the foundation is your content that you have on your website. It is how you're talking about yourself and the story told by you and told by others in the marketplace. These are the foundation which you're going to scale your company on. And so when looking at that foundation, everybody thinks about their website, but if you're going after a certain type of customer, or you've got target investors, or, you know, target partnerships, or whatever your target is, whatever those business goals are, you're going to want to make sure that your content reflects that. So example here is if you're going after a certain kind of customer vertical and your Q3, Q4 strategy is all about, you know, this particular vertical or selling this particular product, you want to make sure that you have a case study that talks to those potential customers, or have, you know, content or white papers or other collateral and other that is going to be talking to that group. Your website's optimized for that. You've got a certain page that you're sending people to. You have, you know, potentially paid or earned media that is going to be in support of that as you're sending out your newsletter or different marketing campaigns. All of that is aligned beforehand with what you're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, you know, you can bring in all of the people in the world who you want to your website, but if there's not content targeted to them, the chances of it kind of hitting and sticking are not as good. So how do you identify your audience, right? Because there's so many different people out there. Sometimes it feels like people are taking shots in the dark. I think LinkedIn is an absolutely fabulous tool for audience identification, and to make sure that you're fishing in the right pond. So, for example, like if you're working in the defense community, or if, you know, you've got a technology that really has a lot of applicability to the Air Force, or, you know, certain kind of verticals that you're going after, everybody lives on LinkedIn to a large extent these days. There is specialty groups for nearly everything, and people are very vocal about sharing content. The conference organizers in this space go and they share their conferences there. Different data and reports are shared there. The association. So it's really a phenomenal way to start honing in on where do I need to be and what are the things that are most engaging to my audience. Just going in and monitoring LinkedIn for the targeted LinkedIn groups, and how you do that, by the way, is going in looking for, you know, the keywords, things that are important in your industry. As company leaders, you're probably there anyway, but it's ratcheting up the engagement. It is amazing. There's groups for everything on LinkedIn. So go in, request to join those groups, and just start observing and watching what people are sharing, and watching like what are the things that people they get the most comments or the most engagement. Are people posting daily news about, or daily updates about certain topics? Like, what is really engaging people? And it's a phenomenal place also if you've got, customers in a certain vertical. It's a great way to start building relationships online that you can move offline. So again, it's just the monitoring, right? Like figuring out who has credibility within the group, what types of content they're sharing, where that content is coming from. Are there conferences that people are sharing that they're going to be attending, or panels? It's really a phenomenal way to gain that intel before taking action. So so many times I see companies just throwing their marketing out there, and it's almost like they're just hoping it sticks like a spaghetti on this spaghetti noodle on the ceiling there. Like, all right, is it going to stick or is it going to fall? What you really want to do is make sure that it's going to stick by understanding what's important to people, what type of content gets the engagement, who the influencers are, and things of that nature. And it really can help you be more successful. So we talked about messaging early on, but what you're going to want to do after you do that monitoring to enhance the ROI of your efforts is then go in and make sure, like after you're monitoring those different groups and after you're looking at different data that's coming out, or different messages that have a lot of engagement for your key stakeholders, making sure that your messaging is contains those certain messages or elements that are really enhancing the engagement. I see a lot of people put things out there that just don't have the kind of kick behind it. And it's kind of like they're yelling into the ether instead of trying to engage. And so, really from a digital perspective, it's all about engaging and figuring out how you can contribute content and be a leader in not a way that's kind of vocal and look at me, but adding to the dialogue. So how do you do that, right? So doing, putting out interesting data, putting out thought leadership pieces, sharing different white papers, different things, data-rich things, or even if you don't have that much time to put into the larger things, figuring out how you can comment on other articles that people are putting out, or going and reading the different content they're putting out, and then putting together something really thoughtful. And if you have marketing members on your team or people that you want to train up, this also provides an invaluable training opportunity because they're just reading content from your particular industry, putting something together, and then you can send that to the executives on a regular basis so that they can then go refine it and share it on behalf of them. And your marketing team will get up to speed so fast by doing things like that. It's really quite amazing how much you learn by digging into different industries. So, now that you've kind of refined your messaging and you have the different elements there, now it's time to really go out and engage those key stakeholders, share the content that you're creating, get involved in different paid and earned media opportunities, apply for different industry awards. So when you're in your LinkedIn groups and monitoring those on a regular basis, you're going to see different conferences that come up. You're going to see, speaking engagement opportunities or things of that nature. You're another really good way to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on is just setting keyword alerts for your particular industry. So, whether it's, say satellites or whatever the thing is that you do within your industry, setting that as your key, a Google keyword alert, getting daily or weekly alerts to your inbox. Anytime those show up in the news, or people put out a press release, or there's a lot of discussion around a certain topic, what's going to happen is that you're going to get that in a roundup in a Google alert. We do those for all of our clients. We have some other monitoring tools that we use instead, but Google alerts are fine. You basically figure out like what the keywords are. You set those alerts and then you read them daily. We set up a calendar for all of our clients, and I would highly advise your marketing team to do this too, where anything that's interesting, say awards or speaking engagements, on your Google alerts, just put a link to the calendar, and then your team can go back later and research that. But it's just a really easy way to start like populating, oh, this is something I should check out later. This is something I should look at. Now that you've been monitoring the LinkedIn and figuring out what's engaging people, that is a phenomenal way to then go back to conference providers and pitch your topics as well, because you know what gets engagement, and that's what the conference providers are looking for too. So then you can move kind of that online digital engagement into the rooms that you want to be in and have a meaningful and engaging discussion. Again, continuing that social engagement there, and just building relationships. At its core, that is what it's all about. So just, one more piece to this, and this is kind of like the master's level piece of the overall strategy, is how to actually track, right? Like, so what matters gets measured. So how do you track marketing ROI? What we do, and what I think has been most effective throughout the 15 years that I've been doing this, is setting up like HubSpot or a different database. And as you have customer leads that come in, you start tracking it. Okay, this lead came in from a conference. This came in from a paid media campaign. This came in from this press release. This came in from whatever the path was, right? And the way that you determine that, it's not an exact science. Sometimes it is, because you, for example, have a capture box on your website that auto-populates into your database. And the person downloaded this white paper and I captured their data, so it came from this campaign. But if you do a big campaign, for example, a marketing campaign in September, and you notice a really big bump in leads in September, you can kind of tag and attribute those in your CRM to that particular campaign. And you track it for everything, right? So you kind of tag the different lead sources in your database. And then what you're doing is, as they're moving through the funnel and getting converted, then you're able to see, wow, I really got a ton of leads from engaging with the foundation of for the future. I really need to go and sponsor them and have a larger presence at the next conference they provide in person, because they are phenomenal. And they're a great source of engagement for me. And you see that through the leads that you have in your inbox, and you just follow it through. And then once you do that over time, what ends up happening is you're able to really track what type of content is most engaging, where the places you should be. And then you just refine that and start taking out the things that aren't as impactful for your particular business. Again, this is, a slide that I had in my last presentation, but it bears repeating. Marketing takes time. It's consistency, because you're building trust. Like, you are building a relationship with the people who matter most to you. And that takes time, that takes consistency. You want to build that credibility, build the relationship. They need to see you. They need to, see examples of work that you've done through your customer case studies. They need to hear your voice and know that you care about the things that they care about, and that you're both working to solve a similar problem. So yeah, that is at the heart. How to enhance your ROI within marketing programs. A lot of times it seems like this kind of cloud out there, or this really opaque, like convoluted thing. But at its core, it's just going in, figuring out what it is that's important to the people who you want to convert, that you want to build relationship with, and then making sure that those messages are in your overall message, and that you're in the right place from both a digital as well as an in-person perspective. So that's all I've got.
Thanks, Joy. I think, those are a lot of times when we hear messaging around, this is how you do marketing, this is the best practices. In hindsight, it's like, well, of course, I should be doing that. Even down to I should be categorizing where I make these contacts, but that's not a lot of our instincts. I know it's not my instinct. And so I think having those reminders of here's how it works, you can actually get useful stuff, and it ends up being not a ton of work.
It saves you so much time and money too. Like I've seen so many clients who we go in and we'll do an analysis on, okay, what are you doing out there? Like, what are the steps that you're taking? And, one of them did a huge, spent so much money on Facebook marketing.
Yeah.
He's like, look at all these leads that we've got. And it's a big company, that was making a lot of money and spending an enormous amount of money on marketing.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, let's track this back. So let's pull, they weren't even tagged, right? So we had to have an analysis done of basically going and pulling all of the data from the Facebook marketing campaigns, and then all of the downloaded the spreadsheet of all of their their customers who converted. Yeah. And there was one out of I think they ended up, it was over $200,000 that they spent in years. And so their acquisition cost for one customer was $200,000. And and they had but they were looking at oh my gosh, we have some enormous number of leads. I forget what it was, but it was over 10,000. Yeah. And it's just you can you have to track back what is actually converting. And so many companies are just oh, look at all this activity. But that activity will kill you in cash, basically your burn rate. That activity will kill a CEO's time and the executives team's time. So many, the world is filled with failed startups that just spent time and money in the wrong ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And especially for startups, you don't have the luxury of time or money to be wasting it, spending hundreds of $1,000s on a single lead.
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds like something out of a bad movie. That's incredible.
Oh yeah, no, the tech marketing, the tech landscape is littered with the oh my gosh, the cash burn rate people is just crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely it's what we all aspire to, but it's not usually a good thing.
Yeah.
I feel like there was one more question. I'm trying to find where it was. Yeah. Not seeing it.
Well, I always appreciate being here, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joy. It was great having you here. And it's always exciting hearing the lessons you've learned, gleaning that, and excited that we're able to share that with our audience here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All righty. Next up, we are joined by John Weathersby, the venerable lead of Stellar Modal Transportation Association.
Venerable.
I got a nickname of Face for Space yesterday, so I'm in the mood to give other people nicknames. I don't want to be the only one.
Face for Space.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad it's not Face for
Radio. You've earned that. You've earned that.
I think thank you. But I'm worried this is like a face for radio, and it's like a backhanded compliment, but I just don't realize what it is yet.
Well, look, now you got Meredith in there, and Meredith is the most photogenic person.
I know.
Ever.
Yeah.
What a great smile.
Yeah.
Her eyes are like this big and like what, like pure blue or something.
Yeah.
Incredible.
No, it's incredible. No, it's
so
exciting.
Why are you doing mine? How come she isn't on there? Why am I stuck with you?
Well, she called me Face for Space and then left. And so I assume that was buttering me up so that way you felt better about me introducing you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anytime. Yeah, but no, we're excited to have you here, John. And I know you're bringing a panel of people, and excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks for including us. We really appreciate the opportunity to work together with you guys, and like you and I've said from the very beginning, this is a big lift.
Yeah,
and many hands make light weight. So
exactly.
light work. So we really appreciate the collaboration, the cooperation, the opportunity, and there's some good things coming in the future that all of us are gonna benefit from.
Yep, agreed.
Cool. All right. Well, I see we got Josh on. Josh, forgot to shave this morning, I see.
Oh yeah, no, I was shaved last night and I figured I'd be good today, but no, unfortunately it didn't work out.
It's testosterone shots are working, I see.
Shh, you weren't supposed to say about those get ready for the Olympics.
Terrible.
Oh, I know.
All right. Cool. And, let's see. All right. Well, let's give it a few minutes. And what time? Well, Tim, you're in charge. You're the helm.
Oh no, I defer to you in this. We can keep rolling with what you got. We can hang out and talk about Josh's magnificent beard.
You've been working on yours since January, I see, right?
Yeah. This is 4 years of growth right here.
Tough crowd, man. Tough crowd.
All right. That's rough.
Well, I've got one more that'll probably bounce on here in a minute, but
yeah, David looks like he's on here, but he just doesn't have audio yet.
Yeah. Let's see. Give it 1 second.
You're good.
All right, you ready? Tim, again, thank you for allowing us to participate. As you said earlier, my name is John Weathersby. I'm the executive director of the Stellar Modal Transportation Association, and we are a 501c6 trade group that works collaboratively with Foundation for the Future and other groups. It's really great to be in a collective environment where everybody's working together. I think it's a very healthy environment, and we appreciate y'all putting on these webinars. And the topic of national security in space, I believe, is such a wonderful topic, but it's broad. And when we looked at it, my background, I've been a contractor for the Department of Defense and different federal agencies for 25 years or so. And everything that I've worked on has always had the focus on national security and how you advance it, move the ball down the field. So that impacts a lot of what we do. And I was been blessed to be around a lot of smart people, a lot smarter than myself, that's for sure. And we've got at least two of them here today. Hopefully a third will hop on. But the folks that I've invited to be part of this panel today to look at national security from a Department of Defense and strategic and tactical perspective. First is Josh Carlson, who is a managing editor of Space Force Journal, but where I got to know him really and was just blown away is with when I read his book, shameless plug here, but Space Power Ascendant. And Josh's book, it laid out how our national focus has got to include the fact that the Chinese are going to the moon, and they're going out and they're doing it from a militaristic perspective. And if they're going, we're going to have to go. And if we let them lead the way, then we don't want that. We do not want to turn up having Mandarin Chinese being the international language of space. That just being one of the minor issues. And another gentleman that we have on today is David Leyva, technically Lieutenant Colonel David Leyva. David and I have worked together. There he is. David and I have worked together for 10 years. He is truly one of my co-conspirators in a lot of the big projects that we've done. And David will talk about the project that we did with the port of Gulfport, where it was actually his brainchild. I'm not going to say single-handedly, because nothing's single-handedly done, but he was the genesis of the idea to get the port of Gulfport, Mississippi, designated as a strategic seaport through Transcom, and he'll go over that, and it's a fascinating story. But what I'd like to do is start off by having Josh talk about his book. I hate to say your book, but it's so concise. I've teased him. I've said that even a general officer can understand it. It is so well laid out and so simple. But Josh, start there, if you would. Speak to the strategic value of space from a national security perspective, and how your vision and how you see things. And I'm going to just turn it over to you for a little bit, let you run.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, John. That's very generous. So Space Power Ascendant, the core of Space Power Ascendant is space development theory, which is looking at space, trying to put a framework to examine space more than just space exploration. Because if you pay attention to when most people talk about space, usually space and exploration are right next to each other, and that's about the extent of what just about everyone talks about. What really crystallized this for me is I love Jim Bridenstine, the former head of NASA, and he was kind of in a difficult situation, as I talk about in the book. So I understand why he did this, but he was invited kind of demanded to come talk before Congress about why the Chinese had managed to surpass the United States space program, because the Chinese are the first to put a rover on the far side of the moon, and they were able to do this by superior positioning and forethought. And Jim Bridenstine, basically, his response was, yes, I understand they put it on the far side of the moon. We put it on the far side of Mars, with the implication being that we've done the more difficult thing, and therefore they are not ahead of us. And the problem is, what that fails to accommodate in that view is that just because you go a place, it is not for the same mission. It is not for the same purpose, and therefore it doesn't have the same impact. So space development theory, for those who aren't familiar, I'll just hit the wave tops real quick, posits that there are throughout history, speaking from analogy, because we've never done this in space yet, but I believe this will hold in space as well, that there are 4 phases, 3 sequential and then 1 conditional, that as we go into space, we will see. And the first one is exploration. And that is throughout history, as nations have expanded into a domain, they have always done exploration first. You have to see what's there. The next phase, which is expansion, is very costly and commits a lot of resources. And so you want to make sure that you know what resources are there, that it's worth the expansion, etc. So this would be like going across the Atlantic to the Americas for Europe, or the British sailing through the Pacific, where they explored and found all the islands they thought would be important. Expansion is the next phase. And exploration, you go and come back. You don't stay permanently, because that's not the purpose of the phase. Expansion is permanent placement of forces and settlements, which is why we talk about in this section spaceports, lunar forts. This is expansion. This is permanent placement of resources in this area. Now you already have identified the key areas, the key resources, the key avenues of approach, the avenues of travel. You now can control these if you with superior placement of forces and facilities. And as we expanded across America, for instance, or the British, they put forts on the islands that they identified as key in the Pacific. The Fort Huachuca, for instance, in Arizona, was originally founded to help speed it was a permanent placement to control the water that was there, to make sure that the settlers going west would still be able to progress west. In space, this is exactly what the Artemis moon base, the International Lunar Research Station, these are permanent facilities, which will be a first of their kind outside of Earth's gravity well. And this is significant because for the first time, you can control locations, resources, have permanent placement that now must be moved by your opponent if they are going to attempt to control these same locations or resources. And then exploitation, which is the third phase in the conditional progression. And this is the key phase, arguably, and this is where always nations want to stay. This is economic benefit. This is an expansion, as I mentioned, is very expensive. It often requires placing infrastructure and facilities and paying salaries for all these personnel that you are using to occupy this area. And it is a net negative for the nation until the economic market has expanded for these resources. The land has become more valuable. You're able to charge tolls if it's a key location like the Panama or the Suez Canal. And so once you've reached exploitation, though, this is now a net economic positive. You have offset your costs to maintain this, and it is now a net positive to the nation. And that is where nations always want to stay. They want everything to be a net positive for them so that they can grow their strength and compete successfully in the world system. That's not always, of course, what happens because we don't live in a perfect world. And so we have competition or even conflict. And this results in the conditional phase, which can occur at any period in these conditional phase or in these sequential phases rather. But exclusion rather is when either your enemy attempts to push you off of something you control, or you attempt to push your enemy off of something that they control. This is an attempting to move them from a particular location or deny them access to something that you have. And this almost always requires some form of projected military force, while a purely rules-based international order would on some level be lovely. That is not the world we in fact live in. And so we must still mass military forces if we are to actually engage in the interests that our nations have. There's lots of international rules against invasions, and yet Russia has obviously still embarked on an invasion of Ukraine. And that therefore I would use that as just the most recent example of the fact that we live in an Antarctic system that does not have a legal overarch to it. Why is all this important in space? So immediate space, the area of the orbits, this is where a lot of our current resources are, just because influencing the Earth through ISR communications, and PNT, or position, navigation, and timing, is a major point of space for right now. However, that is in the process of changing as we go back to the moon, and as China and Russia with their International Lunar Research Station, and the United States with Artemis, and I believe it's up to 16 or 17 nations now that have signed on to Artemis. As these two blocks go back to the moon and compete over the resources that are present, from lunar ice to potentially helium-3. I've seen different assessments of how much is there and the ease of getting it. But as we compete over this, that is the expansion, going back to the moon, permanently placing elements there for the first time. And then exploitation, as the cislunar iconosphere, which is how I've heard it described, develops, these various resources being used in space for space. A great early example would be the space ice, which I've referenced before. You can use that to refuel satellites in orbit. They've already done a test of a satellite in orbit, successfully refueling it with propellant they brought from the Earth. Once you have a propellant depot on the moon, I've seen economic studies that say that you can actually bring propellant back from the moon to the orbits and refuel satellites more cheaply than getting it off of Earth. Plus, you save a booster that you don't have to use now. You can use that for something else, because getting things off of the moon is much easier. The gravity is about 1/10 of Earth's, and so it's significantly easier to get things off of the moon, significantly easier than getting them off of Earth, which lets you, once you're in space on the moon, you can produce things, 3D printers. There's already multiple, in Chinese and the Americans are both looking at 3D printing in space, being able to produce things in space and then put them into orbit or use them in a national security context far more effectively, far more efficiently than you can off of Earth. As that continues to expand, I would anticipate that you will probably start seeing, as John mentioned, I mentioned in my book, first step is the moon, but that's just the Canary Islands of space. The real payback is when you start getting to Mars and even beyond that out to the asteroid belt. But the key first step is getting off of Earth and being able to permanently base on the moon so that you can expand your control. And ultimately, the celestial merchant marine that will almost certainly form as various satellites and transport systems start to develop and be able to move this equipment and these resources through space. There's Alfred Thayer Mahan, very famous treatise on sea power, wrote that there's only 3 reasons you have a fleet. You have it either for aggressive intentions, you intend to attack someone with it. You do it for national pride, you just want to have a big fleet to show how great you are, or you do it to protect the merchant marine. And I believe that the merchant marine is the only real reason you could have a space fleet. You will have to have something to protect it, and it's the only one that will maintain it. America is generally not an aggressive nation, and so we wouldn't be able to maintain something like that for aggressive intentions, and we do not doing it for national aggrandizement would not last very long when you start seeing the price tag for it. And so for all of these reasons, this is how I see the national security situation developing, kind of talking a little bit about the framework, the mental framework by analogy that I see. I think I've got probably about 3 or 4 more minutes, John. That's good. I wanted to just finish with the story and then move on to the next part, or we can transition to it.
Keep going. I mean, this is fantastic. The point you're making about how it's a symbiotic relationship between commerce and military. I think you can make the argument that the point of having a standing Navy is to protect your commercial shipping lanes. And right now, I think we'll see, that's what we'll have in space, because you could have a base on the moon, let's say SpaceX or whatever. Well, who's to say somebody's not going to come up there and try to push you off? So you can have all the treaties in the world, but unless you have an enforcement mechanism, it's going to be you and whose army. And that's, so from a strategic perspective, I believe it's critical. And then, from a tactical perspective on on how you use, reuse, and what else. David will be able to pick up that, and I'd like for you to chime in on it.
Sounds excellent. Well, and I would point out, so I point to, obviously, so the International Lunar Research Station right now is a joint venture between Russia and China. Both of these nations, I would assess, are revisionist powers. They desire to change the current world system, and both of them in the last decade have engaged in overtly illegal actions pursuant to their revisioning of the world system. Everyone, of course, is very familiar with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which I would consider horrible, obviously. And then I assume most people will still remember China's grabbing of the Scarborough Shoals from the Philippines. The Philippines came to the International Court of Arbitration in The Hague and asked them to make a determination. And their determination was China was in breach of international law and that they needed to return the islands to the Philippines. China said, that's very nice. We understand that. However, our legal experts say that that finding is null and void, so we don't have to abide by it. And that doesn't even count the fact that they've generated islands. They've dredged islands from the bottom of the South China Sea and then said, hey, look, we have islands. This cements our hold. By the way, we're not going to militarize them until they did. And now we have pictures from space, commercial ISR assets showing the militarization of these islands. And so it seems very obvious to me that they have no binding of international treaty. In a lot of ways, international treaties are in fact not only something that has no hold on them, but because it's an international treaty in the old system and they don't desire to support the old system, they want to replace it. They actually almost break treaties as a matter of goal. They want to break and prove that the old treaties have no binding power because they want to replace it with their own world system. And unfortunately, the people that think we can just put rules in place and that they'll respect it, quite honestly, haven't learned Sun Tzu's maxim, know your enemy, know yourself. They know neither, if that's the case, in which case they, according to Sun Tzu, they will be in danger in every battle because they understand neither the enemy nor themselves. So talking about the internet,
that's just the cold hard reality of, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need a military or else everybody would get along, but we do. And there's too much at stake in a space environment. There's too much resource, there's too much opportunity, there's too much, bottom line, there's too much money there. So it's going to happen.
And a lot of people point to space and they say, oh, look, we cooperated with the Soviets during the Cold War. Yeah, kind of. But I would point out there's a significant difference. Once again, you have to understand the conflict you're engaged in. This is not just us going to the International Space Station and singing Kumbaya and holding hands with the Russian cosmonauts. This is about resources. This is about resources on the moon. This is about resources on Mars. This is about asteroid mining. This is about the asteroid belt. Once you have resources in the offing and there is competition between nations, it will almost always turn into conflict. I can't think of a single instance in history where competing power blocks had access to resources and it did not develop into conflict. I mean, I think a great one would be the Europeans coming to the New World, for instance. They weren't here more than a couple of years, and they were already having conflict between the Spanish, the French, and the British. Prior to the War of Independence, there was the war in, I believe, about 1750 between the French and the British that George Washington actually ended up fighting in. Because as the British were expanding and they wanted resources, the French were already there, they wanted resources. And they had a conflict. I remember now the story I was going to tell to kind of put this in perspective, because really, as you pointed out, I mean, the resources of space are honestly astronomical, you could even say. They are very significant. And you could argue that the position that America holds right now is largely because of the unique position it holds in the world, as far as being able to expand, being a product of the previous expansion and having a unique position of significant resources without a lot of local territorial enemies.
All right, but without just being, let's go back to the fact that in our world, at least in Western civilization, or at least we're supposed to, military and commercial, there is this symbiotic relationship where technology advances, they play off each other. And that's one of the things that we're, as an organization, trying to do. And we're building relationships with different government entities to help facilitate that technology transfer, because the military is working on some really cool stuff that the commercial guys could use, and the commercial guys are working on some really cool stuff that the military guys can use. So that's where we as a group are really trying to facilitate and drive things. And with that segue, let me bring in Leva. David. Wake up, David. Get back in here. All right. You on?
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah. All right. So, David, tell them the story about some of the things that you and I've done and how it relates to space.
Okay. Let me start by saying I'm David Leva, Lieutenant Colonel. When I'm actually in uniform, although I think that's all the time. I'm on leave right now. I'm in Florida, and typically I try to leave work at work. But when John calls and said, "Hey, I need you to do something," I'll hop on it, even if you are in between me and my rock concert, John. Just kidding. So let me start. The conversation's been very interesting so far, and what I'd like to do is give you before I give you the history, let me just give you where we are. And if I may, I'm going to share my screen. I think these folks did a much better job than I could do to bring you to the current situation as I see it. Can you see this? Just make sure I've got Tom's here. Port of Gulfport, strategic seaport.
Yeah, we see it.
Hopefully you can hear it.
Not hearing anything at the moment.
We get to skip the used car advertisement this time.
I'm sure they appreciate the free advertising, but yeah, not hearing anything.
No, all right. Well, in that case, I'll just drop it in the chat. Sometimes this works. I don't know why. But you couldn't hear the report at all?
No.
All right. Well, let me get this out. I'm not on my work computer, so you have to forgive me. No, I don't know where I'm at. You're hired.
You need a teenager, David. You need a teenager to come over and fix your computer.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Well, then let me do this. I told John I won't do this unless I can use a PowerPoint, and he said fine, because that's the only way I know how to do briefings anymore. I can't do them any other way. I'm gonna try to blow this up so you can see this. But let me give you the present state of where we are in terms of the Port of Gulfport, and sort of bring this around full circle. The Port of Gulfport was destroyed during Hurricane Katrina. Most people probably not aware of where that is, but it's down there in the land with what Jim Cantori called the landmass, in between Alabama and Louisiana. So this port gets destroyed. The governor takes a lot of heat because he takes $570 million that HUD had put in grants for housing, and says, what good is housing if we don't have jobs? So he makes an investment in this port, incredibly controversial, and fortunate for him, the administration at the time was the Bush administration. So politically, he had some cover, but still controversially, it had to work. Fast forward, so Katrina happens in 2005. Fast forward to 2013. I'm working on a project. I come across someone by the name of John Weathersby. Long story short, here's where we were. It started with the effort to innovate Camp Shelby, which is the second largest National Guard installation in the United States, located about 70 miles up north. And after this was built, we were coming towards the end of the surges in Iraq and Afghanistan. And during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, well over 500,000, or maybe not quite that much, but hundreds of thousands of reserve from all branches of the service came through Camp Shelby to train. And what would happen is that they would train with their equipment, but that equipment would have to go overseas. So we were, because of expensive legacy systems, we were accustomed to sending them to Beaumont, Texas, or to Charleston, South Carolina. Roughly 570 miles one direction, 750 miles. Meanwhile, there was this port south of us, 70 miles, that had been built and was really ready to be used. And that's exactly what we presented. So right here, to give you some reference points, this is Camp Shelby here. And we started noticing that Camp Shelby was starting to attract, we were getting very entrepreneurial. So we were starting to attract people who you typically wouldn't attract. Three-letter agencies, federal agencies, some of the higher end of military operations. And we started to recognize that there was an ecosystem that was building. But what we had to do as well is never forget our mission, which was to train soldiers who would come to Camp Shelby because of the vast amount of land. And those are ground soldiers who use vehicles and all that. So while we were flirting with all the sexy, what we call sexy, with all these entities and unmanned systems and everything that was going on there, we could not forget the mission of Camp Shelby. So we just learned to let them coexist. Part of coexisting was saying, what are we thinking about 10 years from now? How do we see the fight happening? And at the time, the Panama Canal was going through its expansion. And in that expansion, we anticipated that post-Panamax ships were going to clog up the East Coast, West Coast, and the deep harbors and along the Gulf Coast towards Texas. Well, these were all the strategic seaports are located. They're located there for a good reason. They're closer to the military installations, and they can handle the large ships that need to come in to transport things to go overseas. So we're putting that all into the equation and thinking about this and just trying to get out our crystal ball and anticipate what things are going to look like in 2023. And here we are in 2012, 2013. And so we put our collective heads together and said, they're probably going to get clogged up, those ports. They will probably have another conflict because we seem to do this, seem to get involved in this every decade or so. And we're probably still going to be open here. And we're probably going to need reserve component units because the American public is not prepared to fund the Army the way it was back when Ronald Reagan was there or even before that. So we're going to be back right where we are. So what are we doing right now to be prepared for 2023? And so that set off this whole outlook. And quite frankly, when John came to me with this about a year and a half ago. I didn't immediately see it, to be quite frank. But I said, John's involved, and he's definitely a decade ahead of most. And I said, I'll hop on, and then eventually I'll understand. So I'll run with you, and eventually and then I'll be quite frank with you. 2 months ago, I saw it. I saw it with what's going on in Ukraine. It was mentioned earlier. Josh was talking about it, but we have trained for the last 30 to 40 years out on the West Coast in the Mojave Desert, with this fictitious group called the Denovians, which stands for Russian, but we don't call them Russians, Denovians. And the Denovians have this mythical power of killing all of your cyber, killing all of it. So there was this absolute, you will lose cyber, you will lose your internet, you will lose all your networking capabilities. You got to learn to be able to go back to World War II and operate that way. And then all of a sudden, that was the case in the Ukraine until Elon Musk decided to shoot up Starlink. And then the Russians, being as smart as they are, they tried to hack it, and they sent a bug. And Musk's people, as smart as they are, they sent a cure. And that's that. And they're operating with it. So this absolute idea, there's a shift right now going on in the Defense Department saying, holy cow, we thought they were that far advanced. And there's people out in the commercial world who are more advanced of what we thought was advanced. So I can see a whole lot of things that are going on. I can also see essentially what is happening here, what has happened here on the ground. And this is just one short case study, how in 20, as I'm retiring in 2033 and 34, we're naming something space-based Weathersby. I would have thought in the past that this was just, pie in the sky and way out there. But, if we could get the Defense Department to see, and again, I'm giving you the very short version of this, we could get them to see the value that this infrastructure could bring to defense with all of the anticipations of what might happen. We could do this in Mississippi and become the 17th strategic seaport, the last one that's been named. Then it's not out of the realm of possibility that we're going to be battling for space in some fashion 10 years from now. Anyway, with that, John, I'll hand it back over to you as soon as I can figure out how to get out of this.
Don't run off, David. Working with people like this, that tells you why I get up in the morning. These guys are great. And it's fascinating to be able to interact with people who can see over the horizon and have the capabilities to get things done. Now, someone else I'd like to bring in is Michael Fitzgerald. And Fitzer, there you are. Now, Fitzer's role in this little play is Fitzer went to the Air Force Academy. He's what we refer to as a Zoomie, and worked for a group called the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, which most people don't have any idea exists. And back when I started working with the guys in DC, it technically didn't exist. And then I remember getting to go and look at their new offices when they came into the light. It was fascinating. But one of the things that I would like for Fitzer to talk about is his current role. And as I say, his current passion is focused on the concept of building a space elevator. And I was familiar with Arthur C. Clarke's, concept space elevator. But when I first started getting to Fitzer, this guy is tenacious about a space elevator. And I'm thinking, okay. That's probably 30 years down the road, maybe. Got a lot of technical challenges there. And then what really has dawned on me is that when you've got someone who back in the 60s, 70s, 80s was dealing with the technology and solving problems and doing things that we are still impressed with today, that's somebody that has seen the future and that has been actively engaged in accomplishing mission tasks that are beyond most people's imagination. So Fitzer's actually been there and done that. Okay, so then when I hear him talk about space elevators, I think, okay, if this is somebody that has seen the future before and he's passionate about it now, then that's something that we really should seriously consider. Now, I've asked him not to go into the space elevator pitch, but I want him to speak about how we addressed and overcame a lot of the challenges, and even in the dark world, and the huge technological leaps that were made from a government perspective, and how they've all played into day in, day out activities that we take for granted now. So Fitzer, you're teed up.
All right,
share your wisdom.
Good morning, everybody. And April, I finally figured out which email your Zoom address was on. I spent 20 minutes this morning arguing with Google that I really wasn't a bot. So that was making my day. And it's so let me set aside the space elevator, except in one context. Now is what then used to be. And one of the things I do, mostly at the behest of my wife, frankly, is to go around to like fifth graders and sixth graders and talk about stuff and keep it as simple as possible. And I usually start off with awes in the audience about how old I am. Well, I am 75, but when I was 8 years old, I actually met a soldier that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, I grew up in central Pennsylvania, about 70 miles north of Gettysburg, so that mattered. So I have a connection with that old guy who was a drummer in the Battle of Gettysburg. So time moves along remarkably. I graduated from the academy and I got out of that place, thank God. I was struggling to not stand at attention when I was on a date, kind of a thing. And they sent me to Intel school and off to Vietnam. I got off the airplane, got my gamma globin shot. Most of you all haven't had one of those, but it's something to remember. And I walked into the reconnaissance squadron I was assigned to, and the colonel gives me the, "Come here, son." It turned out that when you graduated from the academy back then, you had an SBI, believe it or not. Mostly because all these guys were going to be pilots, and you had to clear them early because you couldn't clear them later. I showed up with a clearance, and he took me by the shoulder and grabbed me and introduced me to, believe it or not, the CIA station chief. And he was trying to figure out how to send this picture on a comm system back to Washington, D.C., so the president could say yay or nay, if you know what I mean, okay? So I looked at the colonel and he said, "You got it, son." And that was my introduction to space, 1969, a thing called Compass Link. I later learned out it was highly classified, but who was I? And then about 6 months later, I was arguing with somebody else about whether the target had been hit or not. Well, what we discovered early in 1970, that the Ho Chi Minh Trail was about 200 yards left of where we thought it was. So the geoid was at it, and on and on and on it went. So space has been with us, I think, all along. Now, the two organizations I work with, both had, well, first of all, it was the National Reconnaissance Office and the Ballistic Missile Office. Both of those outfits had one thing in common: authorities. They did not have to coordinate and check back with everybody day in and day out. They had authority to proceed. And I just wonder out loud if we're built that way anymore. My new best friend, Joshua, who wrote a book recently, I understand, who extols brilliantly in the book about first we explore, then we expand, and you know that structure better than I do, but I read it twice now, Josh, give me a break. It's something we ought to study. And I mean study. I don't mean just read, I mean study, because the infrastructure needs of what we want to do in space are, I'll make a pun here, John, are untethered. They are boundless. The requirements for infrastructure in space have not yet been delineated. That's a fancy word, but you know what I mean. And on the other hand, our ability to solve those boundless problems, I have learned from when I was 21 years old and staring at the colonel and the CIA station chief, and also, frankly, back at the old soldier at Gettysburg, is then becomes now very quickly, very quickly. And so as a consequence, we need to pay attention. And that's sort of what I have to say. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I walk down the hallway and somebody grabbed me by the shoulders, come here, come here, come here. And it happened 3 or 4 different times. 3 or 4 times it was a satellite. One time it was a space launch thing, and the other time, 2 times it was ICBMs. They even called me back to go to Utah to look at the new ICBM thing. So we should be unafraid of our experiences. And somehow, John, write this down for me because I'll forget it. My memory's still perfect. It's just a lot shorter than it used to be. Is then becomes now too damn quick. And I love my new best friend, Tim. He kind of pisses me off every so often. But he's trying to work that. He's trying to work it. Go for it. We all should be working it. All right. End of speech. That's what I got.
Okay. All right. So, Josh, help wrap this together. What do you see as the next steps? What do you think, and what should happen, and what do you think will happen?
So, well, thanks, John. I do want to say I'm very happy to meet my new best friend, Fitz, over here. And I think, interestingly, so I would actually recommend, there, obviously it's not exhaustive, but a very interesting paper by Sean McLean from Air Command and Staff called Celestial Sentinels. And he actually takes a pretty detailed look at cislunar infrastructure, and from at least a military context, what we need to be putting at various locations in cislunar to be able to operate effectively, including celestial search and rescue and some other stuff, to make sure that when we start having people moving with some regularity in cislunar, that we're able to operate successfully. So, I mean, that's a heck of a wrap up, John. So let me see if I can do this effectively. So we have what should happen. Well, I think the first and foremost, we need to absolutely be expanding to the moon, and that is absolutely essential as quickly as possible. Okay, yes, Richard, I will post that in just a moment. We need to be expanding to the moon as quickly as possible. First mover advantage definitely accrues to the person who can move most quickly and then choose their seat, so to speak, in the musical chairs that will most likely be played on the moon as we start trying to figure out where the best locations are for resources. And I would anticipate most likely compete over them if history is any indication. And then secondarily, being able to project military force into cislunar to be able to protect the economic and to be able to protect the economic forces that are going to develop in cislunar and lunar, and then also have the proper policies and incentives in cislunar and lunar to be able to incentivize companies and help them to develop economically so that we can enter exploitation as quickly as possible. And then the final part, which kind of dovetails with this, is having a maneuver force capable of maneuvering as needed, especially in cislunar. And then these are the same, once you can maneuver successfully in cislunar, once you can refuel at lunar, And you can send craft, you can most likely assemble them in space, actually, because then you don't have to worry about getting them off of Earth. You can have much larger, more capable craft. You can refuel them in Earth's orbit, refuel again at the moon, and then you can move anywhere in the solar system with great speed and capability, far better than anything we can do right now. And I've seen one or two craft that were kind of interesting, potentially being able to generate their own magnetic fields, perhaps, to be able to help fight the radiation that you'll have to deal with from the sun once you're in solar space. All of this needs to happen. Now, what will happen? I think in the short term, Chinese and Russian competition will, I think, force the United States back to the moon. With the Artemis Accords, I think that we need to be doing that as quickly as possible. My biggest worry is that if something happens between now and when we're supposed to be doing it, we're so concerned with weaponization of space and Kessler effect. Once you have, in my idea, the thing that needs to happen the fastest is we need to get self-replicating permanent industrial capability outside of Earth's gravity well. What that means realistically is that means you need to get 3D printers, basically, that and the ability to fuel them, power them, etc., onto the surface of the moon or onto a O'Neil cylinder, probably at surface of the moon to be faster. And then you can self-replicate your own industrial capacity, getting to space-based solar power, which was just asked that we address as well. If you can build space-based solar power elements on the moon with your 3D printers and then float them back to Earth's Earth's orbits, assemble them in orbit, you can quickly build out space-based solar power that would be significantly larger than anything that we can build and send into space. There's up till now, when you get it off the space, you have to worry, or off of Earth, you have to worry about jitter, you have to worry about weight limits, all of this other stuff. If you can build the pieces, and I can build 50,000 pieces, send it all back, float it all back to Earth's orbits at a fraction of the cost that it takes me to get off. I don't have to unfurl it. I don't have to worry about jitter or all these other problems. And I can create these things very quickly in Earth's orbit and take these same things beyond it. What will happen, I believe that China in particular, because China is the senior partner on this. Russia's space program is not particularly impressive, especially as far as the expansion capabilities. They have developed a pretty finely honed military capability of dubious quality based on their performance in Ukraine. But Russia in general is pretty happy generally to be a disruptive partner. They just don't want us to win. They don't want us to win. China seeks to win. They have a plan that they seek to usurp, in my opinion, the current world order, and space figures into that prominently because they understand that controlling space, controlling access to space, controlling the movement of resources through space, controlling economic capabilities in space allows for the control of Earth.
They play a zero-sum game. Yeah, absolutely.
China was on the way to circumnavigating. I'll close with this story just to talk about the importance from history, because I think history can teach us lessons when they are properly applied. China understands what's at stake, I believe, because in 1420, the Chinese had a treasure fleet that they were on the cusp of circumnavigating the globe potentially. They had already navigated over to Africa. They have a village in Africa that is basically all Chinese DNA because they had a ship wrecked there, and the sailors intermarried with the local village, and they became almost a significant amount of Chinese DNA in that particular village for that reason. However, they obviously did not. And the reason is that China did not have a vision for what circumnavigating the globe, what the ocean could benefit them from resources. And they didn't like the disruptive nature of sea on their culture. And so they turned inward. They burned their ships. They turned inward and just became purely self-sufficient. They shut themselves off from the rest of the world. And they could do that for about 400 years. However, right around 1492, there were other nations that decided they were going to undertake that dangerous journey to start circumnavigating the globe, undergoing the disruptive nature that had on their cultures, but being able to leverage the economic capability. They expanded and exploited in the economic sense, resources from around the world. 400 years later, the dramatic difference in positions became apparent when this little nation that had been under threat by Vikings and continental opponents called England showed up on the shores of China with the mass of the world behind them and said, we would like to trade. China said no, and England said, that's very nice, we're going to do it anyway. And China begins in China's narrative, that begins the 100 years of humiliation where the Chinese nation was largely marginalized and subsequently, virtually destroyed between them and Japan, having significant impacts. And by the way, Japan was undertaking their own expansion and exploitation goals before World War II. But China has learned from this, and they have a replica of one of these treasure ships from Admiral Zhang. And a good friend of mine, Namrata Goswami, has been to China and seen these treasure ships, the replica of them, with an inscription, basically, we will not forget or never again, which the implication being to fail to expand, compete successfully when resources like this are in the offing, guarantees you an inferior position in the world system. No one can win in the world system if you refuse to expand when the time comes. And the real call for space now, in my belief, is the economic, the commercial, and the fact that we are on the cusp of expanding to the moon this decade or very early in this next decade. From then, it will be, I believe, a very short step to exploitation and continued expansion through most of solar space, as it ceases to become the playground of billionaires and governments, and it becomes a place for everyday commerce. And the fact that you will probably have whole new, they're already looking at some universities talking about lunar mining as a future job title. And I think that's really what's in the offing. When we talk about national security space, it's not about satellites supporting warfighters on Earth. It's about having a stellar Navy.
Agree. Now, what I said at the very beginning is I thought there are three legs to the stool to make all this happen. That's commerce, military, and research and development. But while I was thinking about it, there's actually a fourth element that I'd like to include, and that is one of the role that Tim and his group is leading, and that is the policy implication, because the military guys can't work in a vacuum. We're going to have to get the message into DC, into the policy cycles, that space is not just a flippant little adventure, that it is something that is critical truly to our national security. And our group is focused, if you will, more on the technology transfer and the more tactical steps in there. But that's one of the reasons that we work so closely with Foundation for the Future, because they are truly leading the charge when it comes to the Washington, D.C. and policy aspects of it. Tim, you still awake over there? Chime in. Anyway, I'm sure he's listening. Anyway, that's does anybody have any questions?
He's just in shock, John. You just had such a great closing statement. He's on the floor. He'll have to get up and
He is the face of space. What can you say? But let me tell you, it's all, we've all got to work together on this. It's a symbiotic relationship, and that's that. So again, anybody have any questions on anything that we're doing or for any of our speakers? Well, if not, then Tim and April, I think we've there he is.
Yeah.
Hey man, thanks for the
John. This was
thanks for the opportunity to speak to your group. Like I said, we're in this with you guys, and we appreciate it. And I think it's a good contact if you'd like to find out more about us, it's stellarmodal.org. The term stellar modal actually came from David's project at Gulfport. He introduced me to the concept of intermodal transportation, which is simply shipping anything using multiple forms of transportation. And when I started looking at the space environment, it seemed that the stellar part of it was just the next logical step. Therefore, we named the organization the Stellar Modal Transportation Association. So if you need anything from any of us, look me up on LinkedIn, email jmw@stellarmodal.org. And thank you again for the opportunity. And we look forward to being good partners with you in the future.
Thanks, John. As always, great speakers, great content. So thank you. And with that, this is another Conversations for the Future in the bag. We're excited for what's coming next. We'll start announcing speakers for our summer events, and look forward to seeing you all there.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. Have a good day.
Bye.